Welcome to the Daily Wrap-Up, a concise show dedicated to bringing you the most relevant independent news as we see it from the last 24 hours.
Wednesday, May 29th, 2024. Thank you for joining me today. I was actually planning on putting something together quickly today because we played quite a two interviews. We did a lot of work around the Daily Wrap-Up today on the last American Vagabond, an important article. I'll show you this as we go through the show today. Interestingly enough, as I'm preparing, it ended up turning into a reasonably normal size show. So you can prepare yourself for, whatever that will end up being. It's weird how I can't even seem to tell in my mind whether I think it'll be 2 or 4 or where it ends up. Usually a lot of the stuff that comes into the show it's a lot of stuff that kind of jumps into my head as we're going, or thought processes that I want to explain as we go through. And that's what I love about this show, is that there's a lot of, deducing while we're going through this and new thoughts that pop in as we go through. But today in general, we're going to be talking about the follow-up on the Rafah massacre and some important developments around that. The main point that we're going to highlight is a continuation from the last show, day before yesterday, which is that even then they'd already been caught, the Israeli government, shifting their narrative around, which happens every time so far, every major event so far for a long time, but post-October 7th specifically. You've seen, as I've called it, this very reactive propaganda. Examples of that today, in fact, and specifically around this very conversation. And it's I don't understand why it's not the most obvious thing in the world. I mean, I think it is. I think I say that just out of exasperation, because I think the point is we all see it, including the people lying about it. And that's just what's so frustrating for those of us dealing with this. And frustrating is the wrong word. It's horrifying to watch the children, the women, the people in general continue to suffer because of the people who have an interest in keeping these lies going. And it's rapidly diminishing. And I mean, diminishing even amongst the liars, the people that are recognizing, I better back away from this now or I'm going to lose everything. Make sure you think about that too as we go through. There's a good point to start, or in the middle, in the opening section, respectively, I think close enough, where we're going to talk about that. Massey makes a point about Elizabeth Warren that I recently said the other day. I may used her as an example, and interestingly enough, it's a good point to start to show you that people that are out there crying foul, which is good. Even if they're lying, it's still good to highlight that people are calling out what Israel is doing, but that she still voted to send the bombs that are being used. She still took action that allowed this to continue, and then stands back and cries foul. And so my point is, I don't know how you can really take that at face value. So I think a lot of the people that are shifting sides are still secretly, or it's not even about Israel or Zionism in particular. It certainly in a lot of cases is, or can be, but it's just about these people that we're talking about. Politicians, profiteers, opportunists. These are people that will, fair weather fans, for those that understand it from a sports perspective, people that will just flow along with whatever's in their interest. When we're talking about human life, that's a pretty disgusting thing to talk about. Now we're going to focus more on the Rafah, so we can continue to see, from a lot of different angles, how this is being used. We're also going to talk about the whole tragic mistake comment from Netanyahu and how that is now shifting. And that's the point, again, about the narrative changing as it goes along. Now there's a new recording apparent that we'll go through all this and show you what they're trying to claim based on basically, it's evidence because it's a data point, but there's literally nothing but the same people that have been caught lying in the exact same ways trying to do it again, as far as I can tell. An audio recording of people that we can't verify, coming from people that have been caught lying in many ways explicitly with audio recordings already from corporate media. It's really incredible. Now, we're also going to talk about the minor major operation point, which I really think is insulting. And we're going to go through just how clear this is. And I thought of an interesting point that I'll just lay out right now. We'll get to it when we talk about this section, that we have to realize that they're basically saying that, well, a minor operation is okay. And because it's a minor operation, we're not allowed to intervene or act. And the bottom line is that ultimately we're talking about the fact that it's clearly a major operation. But because they're keeping it with that context, essentially they're the ones allowing the civilian casualties by the dynamic they're creating, the United States government, which is not that unique in this whole process. The United States government has a unique position to be able to stop what's happening, and has not only not tried to stop it, has leaned into the ongoing genocide, which is equally incredible based, all the things we're talking about. As much as I think I know who these people are in a general sense, it still blows my mind that we're where we are right now. We're also going to talk about some interesting overlaps around the Pier. And that I find really interesting. I mean, you guys probably already aware of the points we've made, which isn't going to be that different, but the fact that it's now being at least paused, suspended for a period of time, I think there's a lot more going around this than we realize. And the Pier itself has never been about humanitarian aid. I mean, I think that's self-evident, but we're going to talk about what else it could be and how it's always been a plan for something else, and interesting timing of it all around this. It seems to be a game of chicken, essentially, or rather, I mean, it's not, it's which with the international community, I guess, but the U.S. government playing their part while trying, kind of acting like they're not involved, but we're calling them out. But at the same time, we're tacitly allowing everything that's going on. And we're also going to talk about an interesting point around the Philadelphia corridor and the idea of the Camp David Accords and how Israel is currently violating one of these agreements and international law in every possible way. Just all building towards a major point around all of this being the most obvious thing in the world that people see. And I really don't understand how it hasn't ended yet, other than to realize that people in specific positions are, I mean, specific and important to allow this. Like the certain people at certain points who are able to maintain this, to allow this to continue, even though most everybody we can see is clearly and explicitly calling this what it is. And again, like I said the other day, it's like they want to allow this to kind of run its course and then swing back around and act like, well, now we're concerned and now we want to shift things the right way. It's absurd, as they're pretending they want a two-state solution, but Brian Mast acts like we have to pick who's going to be in charge, but it's democracy. All of this is it's an illusion. And on that, I had a great interview with Sal the Agorist, I'll point out in a minute, around this point, the illusion of government, the illusion of representation, and the importance of things like anarchy and agorism, not chaos. Neither of those things mean that word. But of course, the people in power love for you to think the only ideology that doesn't have a place for rulers just means chaos. It's quite the opposite, in fact. And plenty of other things we'll get into. Let's start today with an important follow-up to the censorship conversation, if you guys haven't seen this. And I wanted to make a couple of points about this and one other thing about human shields to address some interesting overlaps that I discussed before this with a couple people. This on the censorship side. Now, these are just things you've already seen, I'm sure, but at least for those that are watching the show, routinely. This was one we pointed out just the other day, May 24th. Twitch, of all places, even though I barely used, I stream there pretty much every time like I do with the rest of them, but I don't really engage in that platform much. They've censored my account. And it seems to be a temporary suspension. And the bottom line is this is going to get worse and continue. This was one of the things we just saw. Another platform that decides to just arbitrarily yank you from, and I didn't get any email, I didn't get a notification. I just had to sign in to recognize, oh, look, I'm suspended. So that's one thing that recently happened. The other we just talked about, which is a big one, which is going to affect the process of TLAV. Now, in no way is it ever going to stop me, even slow me down, but it is going to affect what I'm able to do with this platform, who I'm able to fund when it comes to writing, or new people we want to bring on, or new ventures we'd like to lean into for the purposes of the last American Vagabond. Stripe, if you haven't seen it, has now decided randomly to change their terms of service last month, which uniquely highlights specifically content creators like us, where they argue that what we're doing somehow, one, doesn't have a digital product, which it very clearly does. This literally what you're looking at right now is the digital product by every definition of the term, and that they're claiming that we're somehow not allowed to solicit donations for this conversation under the argument that it's crowdfunding, but it's very much not. Now, I'll get into one point there I want to highlight, but first and foremost, recognize that what we're doing, even as we're asking for donations, it's crowdfunding is a specific concept. It's fundraising. It's like you have a campaign, you're saying fundraise. I mean, you could argue that there's overlaps for sure, but that's why I highlight what they said in regard to the main prohibited business area, which was that there was digital products, and that was what was necessary. But on top of that, let's just even say you think what we're doing is crowdfunding. First and foremost, on that point, you should argue that nobody should be like retroactively removed from something that they've continued to allow because they changed their terms of service. The whole grandfather thing used to apply to most laws, where you can't just change a law today and then go arrest somebody that's been violating that now suddenly for a year because you didn't. This is all like, even like with seatbelts, they argued for a long time that you have a car before that year that you didn't have to wear seatbelts. This is a common thing. Interestingly enough, not in the digital world today. It seems like they can just arbitrarily change things and retroactively give you a strike. YouTube does it all the time. It's not even legal if you really want to break it down. But of course, there's lots of ways around that. Now, Stripe has officially booted us off this platform. And what's frustrating about this is a group that, as one, I think it was Bread and Circus pointed out, it's a great point. Or no, was this, I forget who made the point now. I wanted to give him credit for it. But the point was, it's a great point, which is that, I think it was Chris on AM Wake Up. The point that Buy Me a Coffee is a platform that is specifically about crowdfunding and donations, which is either one is what they're claiming we're doing. And Stripe made a big promotion about working with that group. So now you have a group like Stripe working with Buy Me a Coffee and using Buy Me a Coffee, and they're arguing now suddenly this is a violation of the rules. This seems like a change explicitly aimed at trying to censor people like us and what we're doing. Now, there's a lot of other ways we could talk about this. I don't want to take too much time on this, but realizing that overlap is a problem for their very service, and the idea that this is only being targeted in one specific angle. But I think what's important here is that it's about trying to shut down our flow of the finances for people in this field. We all know that we've seen banking attacks, people like Dr. Mercola. We've seen the trucker convoy conversation. This is only increasing. And now that we know, if you guys haven't seen, if you're new to this platform, PayPal censored us a long time ago, stole about $6,000 that we never got back. Patreon, a little bit of money that we never got, but ultimately that platform has continued to keep us off, which each one of these, at the time, we're seeing so many $1,000 recurring donations coming in. And every time in this platform, in this work for TLAV, for myself personally, has been 2 steps forward, 1 step back since I've started this. And this is about keeping these platforms down. And this is going to affect what we do. But I wanted to highlight this because of the one we're seeing now today. Now, this is directly on the platform. You can see that this is Buy Me a Coffee. Now, we've only ever really gotten $100, $200 a month, and which is amazing. Any dollar we get or any amount we get from people that are supporting us is fantastic. I'm just simply highlighting that this is one that we don't get that much through. And I haven't taken it since February, so that's why it seems like it's a few months added up. So I just noticed, hey, we've got $500 sitting in there. Use that, pull it out, and guess what? Your payments are currently being reviewed by our team. New accounts, that's interesting, are reviewed by our risk team to prevent fraud and legal activities. This is a one-time process. Oh, interesting. Even though I went through this already when we first set up the account, which when it was actually new. So what I can tell you right now is this screams abusing a new customer by dynamic to try to re-review our account to create a justification to censor us. Mark my words, I've reached out to them. And remember, Buy Me a Coffee censored us right in the beginning. And I did this live on the show. I was engaging with one of their help team, and they said explicitly, yes, they took down the post, but then they put it back up, even though in the emails I showed you, they claimed a completely different story. So clearly somebody reacted to what we were talking about. They censored us, and they realized the juice wasn't worth the squeeze at that time. That's what I think. But at any point now, I've appealed, and I've sent in my emails, and I've said, look, this is probably a mistake, like playing the game, saying, I'm sure this was just a mistake because clearly this isn't a new account. And here's our thread where we talked a year ago. Clearly, you've been working. And I think we all know where this is going. So I just want us to realize how incredible this is, how continual. Buy Me a Coffee. I mean, what's next? The only platform I think I can even think about right now that hasn't censored us has been Subscribestar. But in any case, I don't feel like any of this is certain. And what's most frustrating about this is it's frustrating for you guys. I mean, there are people out there that are probably huge fans of this platform that I completely get it, or just, you know what, screw it. And not because they're done with our platform, but because they just don't want to keep jumping through these stupid hoops to stop you from supporting what we're doing. And so every time this happens, it diminishes more and more. And we have to rebuild the platform. This is what it's all about. And again, I'm not going to stop doing this. I don't care if we get down to nothing and I'm sitting here on my phone in my underwear in my room. I'm going to talk about what I think is important. But this should frustrate every single one of us, because this is not just about TLAV. This is about stopping objective, nonpartisan content. I'm absolutely convinced about that. Now, there wasn't the point I was going to make about Stripe, and it's eluding me right now. But I just wanted to make sure we saw how important this was. And, you know what? And I think what the point, that's what it was. I'm glad I remembered that. So there's a lot of overlap, and if everyone, people saying maybe it's about this or about that. And somebody reached out and said that this was probably about the Give, Send, Go, which is its own separate thing. But I want to make sure you guys know that that's not even connected to Stripe. So that was an example of crowdfunding. The Give, Send, Go process was an example of using that to crowdfund, but that was directly tied to my bank. So there's nothing about this that fits with what they're trying to argue. We produce a digital product. They're trying to basically use this to shut us down, and they already have. The appeal was instant denied. Another point I want to include is that we're seeing lots of stuff like this. Just wanted to highlight this, that there are people commenting as if they're TLAV on Rumble right now. That's going to happen to everybody. This is not something we can even do about because it has the one at the end. But of course, when it shows up in the comments, a lot of times you can't see it. Just be aware. We are under aggressive attack right now. And I think it's very clearly about the coverage we're having about Israel. I've never seen a more obvious and aggressive and manipulative propaganda kind of program than what I've seen from Israel. Their open Hasbara program, which is not a secret. It's not racist to point out what they call their own program, which is about manipulating the conversation around Israel. Their own bot farms that they've proudly discussed and shown, because the way they frame it is all about fighting for the truth around Israel, which is clearly not what's actually happening. The world has become aware of what the Zionist organization has done. Not Jewish people, not only Israelis or Jews or anything like that. The Zionist organization, which, by the way, is predominantly Christians, if you understand the real numbers around the world. So how, if we're talking about Zionism, do they always shoehorn it into only about Jewish people when the majority of Zionism, as I understand it, is Christian? See, these points are important. Now, we just had one thing I want to make sure you see is that Derek put out a great article today, a follow-up on our ongoing investigations around the Mormon Church, around the idea of David Hamblin, David Levitt, all these. This is about the Utah investigation around ritual child sex abuse, which was not a conspiracy theory. This was a public and ongoing investigation from the Utah County Sheriff's Office, and they have already arrested people. This person right here you're looking at was arrested. He's somebody who has admitted to abusing his own children on record. There's a video recording of him apologizing for it to his daughter. And there's multiple other cases that are right now ongoing that they've arrested him for. And now, because of some limbo problem where the other guy got promoted, I don't think that's by accident. And now, guess what? They don't have a prosecutor. So it's left up in the air. Now the judge is going, look, unless there's a prosecutor assigned to this, then we're going to dismiss it for lack of prosecution. And that's where it's fluctuating right now. It does appear as if someone is going to be put to it. The point is that you can see how there's already people trying to make this go away like it has before. Now, we have exclusive quotes in here from people involved that are only talking to TLAV, or at least this quote is your only find on TLAV. So make sure you check this out to understand the deep part of what this story connects to and how important this is. Now, let's talk about the two-party illusion and, this all around the bigger conversation here. And this is important because we just made this point. Now, this was something we just talked about. As David Icke said around Donald Trump talking with Tim Pool, Trump is just another opportunist fraud. He had the chance to do this in 2021, but chose to pardon a bunch of crooks instead because that is what suited him. Now we can see political gain and hinting, not even saying he will, but hinting that he may do so because it's what suits him. The result was to keep Assange in jail away from his wife and kids a year after year since his presidency. How people can't see through this professional bullshitter never ceases to amaze me. Tim Pool personifies the compliant mainstream alternative media, or MAM, in this Trump and Musk worship. That's why he got the interview and Trump's endorsement, which wasn't even really an endorsement, but you're a nice kid. The whole charade turns my stomach, he writes. Now, we talked about this already, I think, on AM Wake Up. The point was that he didn't say anything, but we'll think we're looking real good at that, or we'll talk about it. As I responded on Twitter, the typical non-answer, right down the middle BS from Trump, which he seems to be pretty good at. And most people around him clearly know that that's what he's doing, but they use it as often as possible. People like this guy, whoever this person is, this George guy's been screaming about how great Trump is using things like this. Trump just stunned the world, he says on Tim Pool. This is like a Stu Peters level of ridiculousness, or that guy, Matt Wallace, just, breaking news, nothing but links back to my things you can buy from me with no new information. And yet they've got millions of followers. That's a Twitter thing. I know it, but in any case, he's saying he will consider pardoning WikiLeaks. Why is it stunning the world to say he'll consider something that has been considered for years? It's embarrassing. The point is, he didn't give an answer. He gave a non-answer. Yeah, we'll think about that real strong. He's playing you guys. And that's the crazy part, is I think most of them know it and don't care. How embarrassing. But here's the new point. Same, this is not, it's from 2 days ago, but I hadn't seen this one. It's the same point, same interview. It says breaking, same guy. President Trump just told Tim Pool that he will be looking to prosecute Anthony Fauci. That's not even what he said. And others who committed crimes against humanity. This clearly trying to use this or frame it in a way that makes people go, yay, Trump, and give him likes and tweets and shares. That's what it's about. Playing everybody from every angle, including themselves. Understand, he says, when Trump says considering, it means he'll do it. My God. Are we in kindergarten? Like, is this really what people think? I mean, I can't be that stupid. He has to be vague in campaign mode. Yeah, trust the plan. My God, like, I don't want to believe that this is the average level of intelligence of people, even in the two-party illusion. But listen to what he says. I got it right here. Listen to what he says.
Will there be accountability for the lying to Congress when you get to appoint your new AG, deputy AG?
Yeah, and we'll take a look at statute of limitations because, the statute of limitations are quite long, and we're going to be looking at that very seriously, yeah.
Okay. So what he actually said is we're going to look real hard at the statute of limitations. Yeah, real hard. Oh, let's see. So he just completely played you and jumped away from that question. Now, you could argue that he meant that at the end, but yeah, we'll just assume into what we want that to mean. That's real good journalism, guys. I mean, how pathetic. What he said was the statute of limitations, which applies to whether he can, and we'll look at that real strongly. Not even remotely implying that he will. And he's an artist when it comes to these down the middle non-answers and they all just lap it up because they want to. It's really embarrassing. My point about this, guys, is this is constant. We're being played. Now, before we go to the next point, I forgot that what I wanted to say real quickly in the beginning as well was that just for those of you that want to support this platform, I understand that I got into that and then I got sidetracked, but I know it's frustrating for those of you that want to continue to support us. So, if you're willing to stay with us and continue jumping through these ridiculous censorship hoops, it means the world to us. So I think the best thing you could do right now is use a mail-in donation, which the address is right below every video or on the website itself. And still using the things that we have available right now, the other versions, but I think that a Subscribe Star is probably a good option. But what I was going to say was any of the platforms we're currently using, whether it's Odyssey, Locals, Rumble. I mean, as much as I have my own worries about things like Rumble in general, those are places where you can give like super chat equivalents, and we do get it. We have been getting some from them in general. So you can sign up there for recurring donations in the same way until they take that down as well. But I'd say that's probably the best way, unless you would just want to start mailing things in, which I think is the smart way to go at this point. But on all these platforms that you can look at, everyone we're on right now, for the most part, you can do super chats, Rockfin, you can do chats and give us donations, which again, Rockfin is now for free. I haven't been doing it behind a paywall for quite a while now. So just want to make sure I forgot to say that. So sorry to bother everybody with the censorship and funding talk, which I hate as well. So let's get back to the point. So the two-party illusion leading up to the supposed selection, the supposed election, and how this relates to the bigger conversation of what's going on in Israel and Gaza. How every single one of the candidates they're claiming are the only ones we should care about are aggressively, not just pro-Zionist, they are Zionists. That's the scary part about this. So here on another example are people that are blindly supporting pretty much everything. I wanted to make this point about I should have actually done this first. I threw these in at the last second. The Gavin Newsom point about creating laws. This is incredible to me because I always talk about the Constitution. I talk about what it means, how to cite specifically, in fact, the Marbury versus Madison 1803 Supreme Court ruled that a law that is repugnant to the Constitution, meaning that if it's contradictory to the Constitution, it's null and void. It doesn't mean today that they care about that. We have, people like Brian Mast and governor in Texas, and as right to the top of the presidency, who are literally passing laws and executive orders and things that are fundamentally unconstitutional, most of which seems to pertain to Israel, which shouldn't be shocking to you. The point is, just because they all do it and vote for it and act like it's a law, legally speaking, based on the Constitution and the precedent set by the Supreme Court, it's not a law. It's in fact null and void. They're an illegitimate government that's maintaining unconstitutional laws. It says this principle is succinctly stated in the landmark case, Marbury versus Madison, 1803, where Chief Justice John Marshall wrote, all laws which are repugnant to the Constitution are null and void. So the point is, when we talk about amendments, realizing the Constitution was the Constitution, that the Bill of Rights or the first, the 10 amendments were simply additional. They were at the amendments to the Constitution by the very definition of the word. So that gives people the belief, the mindset that, we can just keep amending it. But understand, None of those amendments were repugnant to the Constitution. Go through and look for yourself. Read everyone out. Talking about the Second Amendment, any of them, the right to bear arms. None of them contradict or repugnant to anything that was already stated in the Constitution. So as we go forward and they start talking about passing laws that restricts gun right, well, those are repugnant to the Constitution, period. So they are not legal. I think this is an important thing for Americans to begin to understand as we're down this journey, it seems, to begin to fully question things, not just halfway do it in the two-party illusion, whether it's Israel or our own government or anything else, or foreign policy. So recognizing that, here's Gavin Newsom saying, please read this. If Congress and the courts will not take action to help make our community safer from gun violence, meaning people using weapons, so but it's guns doing it, according to this person, the people must do it ourselves. He's trying to play on the ignorance of what he thinks is, the which a lot of people do, the wrong understanding of what the Constitution, the amendments, and how this works. The people, what it's really saying is them acting in the interest of a constituency, which is not in what any of them do. They act in the interest of their lobbyists, largely AIPAC right now. But he wants you to think you're doing it by backing what he wants to do. But he says, that's why I'm proposing the Right to Safety Amendment, a new amendment to the United States Constitution, which will mandate background checks, ban civilian purchases of assault weapons, and raise the federal minimum age to buy a firearm from 18 to 21. Okay, so the first two are specifically the middle one. Ban purchases of assault weapons. Now, you can hate that all day long. You can say that nobody should own one. The point is, it is not constitutional. Saying an adult cannot go buy the gun he wants based on the current reality of the Constitution is repugnant to that reality. It is contradictory. Therefore, this amendment would be null and void. Okay, so the point is, if you want to argue that shouldn't be the case, then you need to start arguing the Constitution itself needs to be removed, or pretend that the law doesn't matter, or the precedent system we go by does not matter. He says, if you support passing this amendment, then I'm asking you to sign my petition. So all you see him doing is trying to pretend to use the misunderstanding of how this works to manipulate people to support what he wants, which is an amendment to the Constitution, which is literally unconstitutional, which would mean whether they pass it or not, whether it's a law for 40 years, is null and void. It doesn't mean the police won't arrest you in the street. It means that they wouldn't understand it either. And realize this is the problem we keep finding ourselves in, where just because we understand the truth doesn't mean that the enforcement arm cares about that. And this is increasingly what we see in authoritarian governments. And that's where we are, guys. We need to understand where we truly are right now. I just find that to be an important point to make. Now, on that same point, again, that one should have been the starting point. I kind of, as I said, I added a lot of stuff that I wanted to use today that I didn't necessarily plan earlier. But here's what Trump said. Now, back in the point of Israel and how this overlaps. And really associated with the point that we made first about Donald Trump saying a middle down the road kind of answer about, the statute of limitations. Yeah, we'll look at that. And they, oh my God, he's going to do exactly what we want. And no one, and I can I'd be willing to bet if I was going to put this on some, if we were going to be in a casino, I would bet that he will not do any of those things. Not because I don't like Trump, but that's not why. It's because his own track record has been very clear. That's what David Icke was saying. And yet people just keep lapping it up. But here he is saying at this rally, Trump says, when they start chanting Genocide Joe, he goes, they're not wrong. See my point? And yay, see, he'll stop the genocide. He's going to be on the side of the Palestinians. They'll believe. He'll say things like that, and they will believe in the crowd whatever they want to believe. It shows the ignorance of the average person that would do that, and it's not all of his audience. I don't even think it's half of them. But I think it's the problem that a huge portion of them will fall for that. And is that what? Because he says they're not wrong, suddenly he's going to stop the thing that you think. This is the same as like the injection conversation, that they'll listen to a half answer and be like, well, we didn't force it. Oh, see, he's on our side, except the fact that he's the one that keeps championing why the shot is saving lives, even though you all disagree with that. This is frustrating to me. And I think it's a dwindling number of people that are falling for this. I can only hope. But here is Cuts News Network highlighting, speaking to a room full of predominantly Jewish donors, Donald Trump assured them that if reelected, he would crush the pro-Palestinian protests on university campuses, which he described as a part of radical revolution, which, of course, even those that want to stop the genocide in that crowd would probably still hate the campus protests because they've been convinced that the pink hair and the mask means that they can't possibly agree on this topic, despite the fact that they're protesting on behalf of a predominantly conservative population in Palestine who is very against the shot. That's how you're being played. But it says Trump vowed to set the movement back 25 or 30 years if they helped him defeat Joe Biden, of course. He also pledged to expel any foreign students found participating in the protest because that's constitutional. I mean, realize that I've made this point many times. The Constitution, the Supreme Court has ruled more than once, in fact, in many ways does apply to immigrants, and in some cases, even illegal immigrants. Now, they scream and cry and thrash about that point, but it's easily proven, Supreme Court, it's not every single thing all the time, but there are clear cases. I've made this point many times. So in this case, the point is, well, just because they're foreign, suddenly we're going to expel them from the country because they're participating in a political act that we disagree with? That doesn't sound very freedom and liberty to me. It says, which have manifested as tented encampments in colleges across the U.S. He says, at a meeting in New York, Trump commended the New York police for clearing encampments, which, by the way, in almost every sense, were completely unconstitutional. In every sense, were violent. Were, in fact, acting in the interest of a foreign country, which he seems to be okay with, and advocated for similar actions in other cities. This is what he's saying. Now, realize if you don't like Cuts News Network, here's Mid-Press News, who simply highlighted this, and it's very real. If you get me reelected, we're going to set that movement back 25 or 30 years. I don't even think most of the Republican, let's just say the general conservative population agrees with that. In my opinion, I'm sure you'll probably able to disagree with that, but this is my point about understanding that even the campus protest conversation, sort of like the COVID conversation, was not partisan. There's clearly a slant. There always will be. There will always be a slant in one direction. But you can clearly see that it was Muslims and Jews and Christians and conservatives and Democrats, all of these people who just simply were like, yeah, genocide's bad. And that's the majority. Now, here's the point about Elizabeth Warren. Thomas Massey said this. And again, I will continually say that Thomas Massey's got to be one of the best examples, not entirely. I've seen him contradict himself and things he's voted for in the past, but so do all of them. So it's not a very high bar for me, but either way, I think definitely of all the people in Congress, he's the one that continues to vote in directions that I align with. But always keep that in mind. Just whether that's some opportunist action, trust me, I am jaded. I get it. You guys, but my point is that right here and pretty consistently lately, Thomas Massey's saying things that I think are absolutely right. Here's Elizabeth Warren saying the Israeli bombing of the refugee camp inside the designated safe zone is horrific, which of course it is. Anybody saying otherwise is a monster right now. Israel has a duty to protect its innocent civilians and so on. And he goes, ma'am, you voted to send those bombs. Which even the Twitter context adds, which you can read the bill that she voted for, which allowed Israel $3.8 billion of weapons and, in fact, voted to defund the UN agency for Gaza. All of which is about food and aid and shopping weapons, and yet she's like, all that has to stop. I don't know how you could take that seriously. Now, maybe she changed her mind, which we should hope for, but I just want us to recognize that this is what we're seeing a lot of opportunists who recognize that Israel, rather specifically the Zionist day has come. Right? This is rapid landing. Doesn't mean they might not find a way to ramp it back up and find their control again. But right at this moment, they all feel it too. Trust me, they're terrified. Zionism is coming to an end right now. People are all calling this out for what it is. And screams and shrieks of anti-Semitism are not going to stop that awareness because it's not about Judaism. As I've said many times, the only people making this about Judaism are Zionists and racists, in my opinion, which of course I could be wrong. You guys can decide for yourselves, but I think it's pretty clear. By the way, I had a really great conversation with Adam Green on his show a couple days ago. I'll try and grab that and put it in the show notes. I forgot about it to include today, but it was a really great conversation. I retweeted it. It's on my thread on Twitter. And, again, we have different opinions, but the more we talk, the more we seem to basically be saying the same thing. Like that it's largely about Zionism. It comes back to the point about where this originates. But in any case, I think it's very clear right now that, yes, it's about Zionism, which has influenced a huge portion of the Jewish population. But I am now wondering what is that a huge portion of the Israeli Jewish population? Because clearly we can see huge groups of Orthodox Jews that protest Zionism in Israel. I'm wondering whether that's a diminishing number in the world. And I think that. I think that it's beginning to get close to a majority situation where Jews in the world are recognizing that Zionism is not what they support. Realize before this all, a massive portion of the Jewish population didn't associate with Zionism. That was already there. That has been addressed many times in the past, not in a racist way, just going, well, they don't agree with Zionism, but they weren't pushing back against it. They just didn't associate with it. So those people, and some of them spoke out, and they got called anti-Semitic all the way back then. But now you can see that plus all the people that are going, well, I can't associate with this. Even people that believe themselves to be Zionists are going, well, that's not what I thought this was. I'm not okay with murdering children. I can't just scream Zion, and that's changing. And so I really believe that we're watching this change in real time. Now, yes, maybe I'm being hopeful, but I think that's happening. Now, here is another example of a so-called leader who, by the way, is seemingly next in line for Trump's cabinet. Orson, this guy kills me. This is supposedly the international human rights lawyer who says, message from Nikki Haley written on Israeli missile intended for Hamas. Finish them, America. Israel always, she writes. Finish them, she writes. Finish them. Love Nikki Haley. Now, as I understand it, these are munitions for artillery. So it's not necessarily missiles, but I just used the word he used. And the point wasn't necessarily whether they're missiles or artillery, but that these are being used to kill people, children, women, donkey carts for crying out loud, everything. And the point is, find out below what Nikki Haley wrote on missiles currently burning children alive, because that's what we're talking about, guys. And she goes right after the conversation with Trump, or about Trump's cabinet. And she goes and she signs the things that are, and this was before the Rafah massacre. So some of these very well might have been used to burn children alive, and she's signing little hearts on them. Can't wait to see what cabinet goes around Trump again. Remember the last time with Pompeo and Bolton and everybody else, they were like, you got to have the, people from within to fight back against. It's like, my God, same old game will play, I'm sure. And every one of them, one by one, got turned on by their own community. Bill Barr is going to save us. Oh, now he's a bad guy. Two-party illusion, guys. Got to wake up. Now, I'm going to play a great clip from Carrie Wedler, because she's always knocking it out of the park, especially when it comes to the two-party illusion. And she says, 100% accurate election prediction. Can you guess what it is? Who do you think is going to win? Well, she's going to tell you.
Fixating on who's going to win in November, but the winner is already obvious. The government. That's right, the government is going to win no matter which flavor of authoritarians and their corporatist benefactors and partners in crime you elect to rule over you and the rest of us at every level of government. Their enforcement class will also win, retaining their power to steal from you and inflict violence for compliance with politicians' rules. This monopoly on violence is exactly why you get no accountability and keep getting criminals who couldn't care less about your freedom and well-being ruling over you, elected or not. And they're further emboldened by your belief in this coercive authority's legitimacy and your willingness to play the game. You have no real choice within government. You have an illusion of choice, but you do have agency outside the state. No politician or authority is coming to save you.
Thank God.
Only you can do that as an individual or in voluntary groups. And as a matter of fact, if you need saving at all, it's from the government and politicians you keep voting to empower.
I love her work. and by the way, if you guys haven't noticed, I mentioned on the show the other day, Carrie was editing for TLAV for a while, and then they're due to some background stuff that had nothing to do with the work. She had to take a break from it. I hope she'll come back. We've talked about it. I think she might even write some stuff for TLAV. Point is, just in case you're wondering, that's no longer on the team list and everything like that. But I think it may happen again in the future. It's ultimately about the able to do work in general. I'd love to see her start anti-media again, but I think that's kind of a sensitive spot for her, and I get it. I mean, that's honestly, guys, that's a trajectory that we're on right now, not by choice, right? I mean, you ask her. I mean, it's a very sad conversation. I've had it with her before about how hard it was to have to deal with that, to watch that amazing platform get dismantled one by one. Again, it's. I mean, clearly you can see it's on my mind. The overall thing for me that worries me is about where we're going with these lawsuits and everything else. And now they're attacking one of the legs that we're standing on when it comes to our finances. That's not by accident. And we'll see whether Buy Me a Coffee breaks it down as well. Sorry, we'll get back to the point. So, on the conversation of kind of getting into the Israel conversation off the two-party illusion, I think this is just so embarrassing the way that they're constantly trying to make this about, like, again, back to the COVID point. If they can get you to think this is partisan, they can work that same illusion over all these conversations. Like we said before, if they, like a lot of the Republicans, have disregarded a very obvious thing because they thought people with pink hair were manipulated, and it's all, which even if they were, realizing that the actual point was obviously real, or the fact that they were being suppressed, their free speech was being shut down, and the people that were 30 seconds ago being treated the same way. Even being called anti-Semites in the same way. The MAGA group were suddenly cheering on the suppression of their speech. Or people like, even worse, ridiculously, people like Ben Shapiro and Dave Rubin, who were on tours about using culture wars to shut down speech, or a cultural point, or using, the same conversation, using these things to shut down speech. And here we are in the same conversation in reverse, where they're calling to shut down speech because of their political beliefs. It's obscenely stupid. Here's a good point on that. Mr. Mossad, admittedly it's Mossad agent, Said, how do you say his name? He did a little poll, which I don't know why anybody thinks these polls ever end up to the reality, because one, especially on these, you're getting it slanted by the people that follow you. He says most pro-Hamas protesters, which, by the way, is a ridiculous question in the first place. If you talk about pro-Palestine as if it means pro-Hamas, you're a ridiculous person. Because yes, there's going to be an overlap. There's people, but at the end of the day, the majority of them are simply fighting for Palestinians and their self-determination. And they just pretend that's not what they think, or pretend they hate Jews. It's sad. He does this. This guy does the same thing. But looking past that ridiculous framing, of course, his audience votes Democrats, 76%, which I actually found it interesting that 20% of the people voting said Republican. In any case, the point is it's not one side or the other, guys. If what we're talking about is that people in those protests, like I said, if you actually do your due diligence, you'll find that it's both sides, or mostly people that realize the two-party illusion, or somewhere in the middle, that maybe conservative, maybe liberal, but don't necessarily identify with one of the other sides. That's what we're seeing. Which and the point is, that's not even interesting. It's not unique. That's a pretty dumb framing of that. Why does that even matter? The point you're trying to make is you're trying to, in a surreptitious way, or kind of subtle, but it's not very subtle way, to suggest that that's why it's dishonest. Because Democrats lie. Are we really still there? It's just all of them in one group, the broad stroke, because that's really intelligent, right? Of course, Elon Musk thought so. Interesting. What's interesting? The thing that you all already say and everyone seems to talk about. It's I don't agree with it, but you all seem to think it's the case, and so why is it interesting? Self-verification. It's funny to me, and Patrick says it the best. Patrick Henningsen. Such a profound poll. What fanatic insights? Fantastic, I think he meant. What fantastic insights. We can glean so much from this revelation. Pinch me. I must be in the presence of intellectual greatness. So interesting. It's sad, because this is the kind of gaslighting we're seeing. These people are not on your side. They're desperately trying to keep you trapped in the paradigm. Twitter files was exactly what that was. Oh yeah, whatever happened to that? Oh, the source material promised that was definitely going to go in. Oh yeah, never mind. And we all just keep moving along. Not everybody. Now, on that note, I had an amazing interview with Sal the Agorist, who I really, I loved his work before, but after having this conversation, he's a very interesting and unique person. I really loved, just the passion he had around this, and the conversation we had around not just agorism and anarchism and what they really mean, the truth of what they mean, not just chaos, the actual understanding that there's a valid societal direction that could be taken there that would actually alleviate a lot of the problems that we point to, without realizing that, they're pointing at the other side, but they're really just pointing at statism. They're pointing at authoritarianism, and this would be a solution to that. Obviously, it seems near impossible because of the mental constructs that have been we're trapped in this mental prison. The same old thing that Corbett and I have talked about many times. Who's going to build the roads? You will, just like you do now. The government hand over everything doesn't really change much, other than your lack of freedom, your lack of control. The point, though, is that we also talk about how humor can be used to, get people to accept difficult truths from a different perspective, the meme warfare conversation, the two-party illusion. And I hope you'll check this out. It was a really great conversation, because I really think that is cracking, and it's time to push even harder, because the two-party illusion, as I've said many times, is the main block to real change. Now, getting into the conversation of Israel and Gaza, I want to make a quick point that me and one of our supporters talked about today. And he makes a valid point, and I want to make sure, and it took me a second to really get what he was trying to say, but I want to make sure that I explain my argument here, because the point of human shields is a central point to their argument. Is what I've been saying lately is, and I stand by this, it's still valid, but I want to add what he was saying to make sure that this is included, is that in the conversation, what we keep getting told is that there's human shields. And we have yet to see a single provable example of that coming from the side of Hamas, which I've never said it wouldn't surprise me if we saw them. But as Robert has said and proven in multiple articles, even the UN's own investigation concluded that they could not find any evidence of that going back years. Doesn't mean they haven't. I think it's hard. I find it hard to believe that it hasn't happened, at least in an individual case, right? Maybe not from an administrative top level organization, but somebody might have done it. I find it hard to believe it hasn't happened. My point is that without evidence, you can't just keep putting this claim forward. It's also important to point out that UN and other groups in the beginning said the onus is on you to make that case. You can't just keep saying that. It has to be proven, and they've never done that. So my point in all of this is throughout this whole process, we've continued to see schools bombed, apartment buildings, people killed in the street, and their argument is human shields. Hamas is doing it all. And we see the ridiculous people like Pompeo and the Brian Mass of the world screaming that it's all their fault. No matter what happens, it's all because Hamas, and we know what they're doing. And the narrative just keeps spinning with no evidence. So the point I keep making is we keep seeing the shield part of that dynamic. And I'm not trying to diminish their lives. I'm trying to use their point to make this clear. So we see the dead person that they claim was shielding somebody else. So my point I keep making the point, where is the human part of that dynamic? Shouldn't we logically keep seeing Hamas members killed next to them, or at least somewhere within the reason? No, we don't see an example of Hamas killed anywhere. But the point he was making is that we don't need that, to be clear, that there's an argument, and I think there's a differentiation when it comes to international law. I've spoken to international human rights lawyers about this, but that they're like, let's just say you have a person in a building. That's not the case of human shield if they're just standing in a building that they then say, well, there's Hamas in there, so we're going to bomb them, and they're using them. The point is that this is typically discussed around combatants and holding them in front of them, or at the very least, keeping them around themselves to use that as a deterrent. But there is an argument about, let's say, a military object, a tank, let's say. And if you had that person on the tank, right? But my point is still that the argument would be, and I wanted to include that so it doesn't sound like I'm suggesting that it has to be that kind of example where there's a person and another person. The point is that either way we talk about this, if there was a person that was simply taped to the front of a tank and there's nobody in that tank, you could make an argument that that wouldn't be a human shield. Or you could argue that it is. That's the point of discussion around whether another person has to be behind them to make that a human shield example. But moving all that aside, I just want to clarify that I still think the point is important. Where is the Hamas member that is allegedly using them as a human shield? Whether it's a military object or it's a person themselves holding them, or that they're found in a basement somewhere and they're on the top floor. The point is that we've never yet seen an example of the Hamas members they claim are the ones using these people as shields. Just to make that as clear as possible. But it's a valid point to bring up that it's not just about individuals and people. It's also about military objects. But the same point applies. And I thank you to the person who brought that up, because I think it's an important point. But I still think it's very clear that if the argument was true, that they're using these people in every single case where they kill somebody, which is essentially their argument, or at least Pompeo and the rest make that argument, that every single person is responsible because Hamas, and Brian Mass has been just continually pushing this lately, that we know they embed themselves with humans and human shields in every dynamic and every home. So if that was the case, we would have seen a lot of killed Hamas members using those people as shields, and we have yet to see that. So here's Pompeo saying to yesterday, using civilians as shields is a core Hamas strategy. Like, why does this guy feel the need to just come out and say that? He's cementing the narrative. He's doing his part to propagandize and keep that flowing, and you'll see the same thing. You'll see the kind of flow of the same conversation, right? What we keep seeing, for example, around Rafah, is people are saying all eyes on Rafah. So the Mikey Rappaports of the world and the rest of Elon Levy, they all do the same exact thing. They come out and say, all eyes on Rafah, huh? Where are my hostages? Where are the hostages? Where are the hostages? Which is a really disgusting point to make. No one's saying the hostages' lives don't matter, except Israel, who continues to bomb exactly where they are. The point is about, look at the children that just got burned alive. And for you to go, then what about the hostages? It's just a disgusting thing to do. How about the fact that all of their lives matter, not just the one you want to point to? Then when you do that, you're making the point that the children that just got killed are irrelevant to the conversation. And that's very, very disgusting. But this, back to the point, is that we keep seeing the same idea here, that he just comes in and goes, human shields, out of nowhere. He goes, instead of criticizing Israel, world leaders should condemn Hamas. See my point? How about we do both, man? How about we are capable of using two things at once? Maybe you're not, but we can go, Israel can be criticized for breaking the law and murdering children, and Hamas members who are funded by Israel can be condemned for what they've done as well. Nope, can't do that. Can't do that. But here's the point, as always. I said it is sure a core part of somebody's strategy. Can you guess who? Meanwhile, we get trust me allegations from known liars like yourself while disregarding decades of documentation. Now, you can watch this for yourself. This is just that clip that I've played a lot about the human shields coming from basically every human rights group in the world. The leading human rights groups in the world who have documented not just the neighbor procedure, but before that, I think it was 2000. the early 2000s and before, or if you watch the clip again, they acknowledge it. Israel admits to doing it and says we won't do it anymore. So even if you think it's not happening now, it's on the record. They did it for decades, but they switched to what they call the neighbor procedure, which the UN followed up and said, well, that's still human shields. And they've used it to this very day. We've actually seen at least 4 or 5 examples since October 7th, like vivid, very clear, undeniable examples where they have a guy with a blindfold and they're shooting right over him at other people. It's very, very obvious. That's what I mean by ignoring provable facts and pointing to unproven allegations. That's all they seem to be doing. Now, here's Caroline Glick, and I wanted to include this. I added this kind of last second. Interesting point here. Now, at first, I saw some arguments coming out that this might have been a fake story, but it seems to be reported by pretty much both independent and corporate media alike, which is that in Mexico, the Israeli embassy is in flames. And here's what Caroline Glick has to say about that. This is what a world war against Jewish people looks like. Oh, okay, so just immediately jumping to well, it's the Israeli embassy. Are only Jews in Israel? That's okay. So you only care about the Jews in Israel. Okay, as long as we establish that. So there's clearly not just Jews in Israel, but that's what only thing she cares about. So if they're attacking a country's embassy where there are other people than Jews, why would it be an attack on Jews alone? That's a strange thing to say. But obviously they want that to be the argument. But it's an attack on the Israeli embassy, largely because Israel is committing a genocide. But the only thing they can do is divert that to just the thing they want you to think about. But let's add more to that, right? And she goes, flames, murder, beheadings, humiliation, discrimination. Are you talking about Gaza? Oh, I'm sorry. I got confused for a second. I thought she was referring to what they're doing in Gaza. No. She means just one building. Think about how crazy that is to be, as they're literally burning children alive, murdering them, beating detainees and having their arms being amputated, humiliating them in front of everybody and raping and all sorts of horrible things they're doing to them. Discrimination, clearly, flames, murder, beatings. For 75 years, let alone not just October 7th forward. And she says this after they bomb an embassy. And I think what's crazy about this, or rather, I think it's Molotov cocktails is what it was. Do you remember where the other story goes with this? We just talked about this. This is her screaming about people pushing back against what Israel's doing around the world. And you can disagree with their actions. I wouldn't condone acting against an embassy. I think that's off limits. It is. But you know why it's happening? Because they just did it to Iran and Syria. Oh, I guess we forgot about that, right? Where they literally just bombed the consulate building of the embassy in Syria. They murdered people in there, civilians and military personnel. And the U.S. didn't blink. They didn't care. And then on top of that, Derek covered this. I believe it was, I don't want to get it incorrect. Hold on. It was a Mexican, there was an embassy in Mexico. I wanted to make sure I didn't get the group right. I think it was Nicaraguan or... Hold on. Yeah, the Ecuadorian government. Says recent actions taken by both Israel and the Ecuadorian government have called into question the sovereignty and sanctity of international embassies. So in Mexico, the Ecuadorian government raided the embassy in order to take somebody back that AMLO had given sanctuary to. Why? Well, because they saw an opening. They recognized, well, they just bombed an embassy over there. No one cared. Let's take advantage. And clearly they got away with it for that very reason. So imagine screaming foul and pointing to things you're literally doing in real time to children and saying, this is what a war on us looks like. Well, you literally just did this to people in Syria. I mean, this is how crazy this is. And this is why people aren't falling for this anymore. They've lost the plot, guys. I don't think they know what to do. Now, getting into the major conversation about Rafah. I want to make sure we start with a few points that for the last couple of days, we remember. These are important to understand what's going on. If you haven't seen this, remember first, in this one point, that the ICJ ordered them to stop, not just to stop, but not to go further in Rafah, but also to stop entirely their operation in Rafah, which they laughed about and said, no way, we're going to do what we want. But remember that Sam Husseini highlighted using, I think it was Article 41 of the Charter, that they were binding international legal obligations, both to Israel in Palestine, but also the rest of people who were signed to the Genocide Convention to stop this from happening, and none of them cared, except the countries that stood up. I didn't say none. Thinking Iran, Ireland, Norway, Spain, and a few others that sort of like, I mean, I think really the argument should be that they were obligated to stand up and do something about it. Only a few of them stood up and at least acknowledged Palestine. But even then, you can argue they didn't really stop what's happening in Rafah. Then we had the bombing of the area we just talked about. The bombing in Rafah, which is important to remember, is the exact location that they told them to go to the day before they bombed this location, or the days leading up to it. 2371. And if you look here, this is the post from the IDF, where they literally included 2371 as the location that they should go to avoid the Rafah operation. And here are those tweets so you can see for yourself. They posted this and this is where you can see the 2371. That's the location they're saying is safe. That's the safe. That's part of Al-Mawasi. Here is Lieutenant Colonel Peter Lerner, who I guess in his own way trying to debunk the story, goes, yeah, that's where we struck right there. See, it's not in the humanitarian zone. Oops. Location of the strike, which is exactly where they told them to go. You can't miss that. It's the easiest thing in the world to prove. They dropped leaflets, they posted online, they talked about it. It's very, very clear. So just like the Flower Massacre, they deliberately told them to go where they then murdered them, which many people burned alive. And since I forgot to grab this, just as I always do include this, so you understand that this is not disputed by Haaretz, by New York Times, that Israel has used the most destructive bombs they have, the 2,000-pound dumb bombs, which means they don't have guidance, in the safe zones. According to New York Times, Haaretz, according to anybody with a brain. And yet they still deny it. So that's important to understand. Deliberately bomb the area they were told to go to. Now, we just had a great interview with Robert. I played it this morning. The ongoing Rafah massacre, October 7 detainees / hostages, and is Iran next? Now, we talk about Rafah, obviously, but what's important is this conversation, I think, is really important to the larger dynamic. That he gets into a really important nuance about both hostages, which we talk about, which, for example, the Bibas children before they were killed by IDF bombs, according to their own father, which they still, to this day, every time I see them post it, all of them are doing it now. They go, where are they? And they post the children's faces. They know, because, and not only do I post it beneath it every time, and I point to both the father, the video of him saying they were killed, but also that the corporate media was forced to admit it in their own coverage that Dan Cohen has covered. And I post it every time, so they know that. But on top of that, they also know this because it's public knowledge. And yet they keep using their memory, which is disgusting because they think there's some kind of benefit to it. It's a propaganda benefit. The point, though, is that those would be illegal hostages. And they were. There's no way around that. They took that child. Now, what we get into is why he thinks that might have happened and the conversation about the nuance around all of this. There's even one point of argument that I'm sure people will get upset by this, but it seems interesting about whether or not some of these people might have been taken to keep them safe from the IDF bombs and attacks. Now, I find that in many cases to be unlikely, but you can understand that there are, as he pointed out, plenty of people in Hamas today that are there because they watched their own mother and children and brothers and sisters get killed right in front of them in the past 75 years. So they have a special a sensitivity to the protecting of women and children. And even on top of that, if you really understand what they believe, most of them think that's wildly off limits. Alternatively, you can see the Israeli government and their own IDF members screaming about how nobody's innocent and children should be killed. But the point about that is fascinating to me. On top of the fact that there's a lot more around that. I mean, even how many people were. Watch it for yourself. It's a really important conversation. Now, a couple additional points before we get into the mistake part of this is that Asaf MD points out that Israel meant to hit these two tents boxed in red right here, at least what they claim. By their admission. He says they ended up incinerating everyone and everything inside the blue box. Just to give you some context on what we're talking about, right? So the red was what they claimed they were going for. The blue was everyone that died. And he says that today's statement, they added a new statement, which was we're going to get into the kind of shifting narrative, which happens every single time, by the IDF, added zero new information. And this was posted on yesterday, 28th, the end of the yesterday. He says the rocket launcher has no evidence of fire or soot, even in their satellite imaging. So they keep pointing to what they found. I showed you the image of the thing they found they claim was in Rafah. That's where I got into the conversation of the historical story about that National Geographic put out. Now, I have a clip that I'll show you later on. It relates to something else where we discussed that, which was a verifiable statement from National Geographic speaking with people inside of Gaza and Israel, admitting that a lot of these smuggling tunnels were operated in plain sight. Egypt and Israel were well aware of them because there was a lot of money being made. And the quote directly from National Geographic was that they these merchants were invested in keeping the closure going because they were making so much money smuggling. And I don't know how that would be possibly happening without the interest of Israel. I think that's very clear, in my opinion. But that they would say, the quote was that they would pay these people to fire a couple of rockets in order to maintain the closure. And on top of that, it seemed like the vast majority of what they were even bringing through, because the siege has been going on for decades, not just October 7th, medicine, food, toys for their children, gauze and medical equipment. And then, yes, also the conversation about weapons. But again, Hamas is funded by Israel, and that was not something that was secret, especially since we can show that this is in plain view of the checkpoint in Egypt, with both means Egypt and Israel can see them. My point in all of that is to highlight that this rocket launcher that seemed, which I showed as well, was not loaded, despite their narrative saying it was, and that it was old. So for all we know, maybe it was used, certainly possible, but it's just as likely it was an old example of something that was there to maintain the thing that they wanted to maintain. In any case, they struck the tents in the red box. People have propane tanks in their tents, which they use for stoves. They have cloth blankets, plastic roofing. It was all set ablaze by those two bombs. All the narratives are that they was Hamas with lots of weapons, and that's why it all went crazy. They're now shifting, even though he said it was a mistake. And others have acknowledged that it was about killing the Hamas members, and they've just rapidly spread. It's an accident. Now they're trying to repack that up because the other information has come out that shows that they're lying. So they shift reactive propaganda. Well, now it's about the Hamas rock and the Hamas munitions, and even though none of that is verifiable, and the realities become very clear. But he just adds to this. And by the way, you could there's a longer thread for more information if you want to check it out, giving you more details on the satellite imagery, showing you that what they hit, where it literally says in order to minimize civilian harm, like was partially why it ended up spreading. Like, I think this was very deliberate, quite frankly. But there's more if you want to read about it. Now, getting into the shifting narrative, which is really the point, since we already went through most of this in the last show. I will play this again really quickly. It's only a minute and a half. This is Greg Stoker, who's simply highlighting that right away, both random accounts on Twitter, but also official accounts came out and immediately started trying to give you the wrong narratives. Oh, it was a Hamas rocket that fell, and that's why, or all the different things they spun up. And then suddenly it went to a narrative that they stuck with, and then changed that one, and now it's changed again. You know the U.S. government can see this. You know anybody can see this. And yet some people keep pretending it's not dishonest. So here's what he said first. This was the day before yesterday.
This is a developing story. Israel just dropped a massive guided bomb unit on a refugee camp in the Tel al-Sultan neighborhood in West Rafah, where civilians were told to flee to after the IDF ground invasion of East Rafah. This airstrike was conducted in retaliation against the rockets shot out of North Gaza into Tel Aviv. And bear in mind that Israel's overriding military doctrine, the Da'iya doctrine, is to collectively punish civilians in order to pressure the associated militant population, which is by definition a war crime. And boy, is the Israeli Hezbollah Volunteer Corps coming out in force on this one. There's like a fire in the refugee camp. A GBU JDAM won't produce such a blaze unless they hit an ammo depot. Or this was a failed rocket launch by Hamas, as always operating from inside civilian areas. Those are actually Hamas rockets which misfired, landed on their own people, just like the hospital explosion at the start of the war through the PIJ rocket.
And those are three separate claims, all individually different, and yet were made right in the beginning by multiple people, including high-level officials. I mean, I talked about this. Think about how crazy that is and how obvious that is. This happens every single time. And the argument about the Al-Ali hospital, which they were referencing, was the same point. Hanania Naftali lied about it, just like Elon Levy and the Flower Massacre. I made the point last time. They came out and they said, no, it was because there was a Hamas member there using human shields, which was the narrative that they used for every hospital since. But then they came out and said, no, never mind. Or rather, IDF came out and said, no, it was a Hamas rocket that misfired. So he deleted the tweet and they went with that. And then everyone since they said human shields, which doesn't really add up, except when you realize they're lying about everything.
Was Hamas? Really? Not according to your own media. Ynet News, IDF strikes significant terrorist compound.
So you get the point there. The obvious reality is that they were lying immediately about this story. Now, first and foremost, Netanyahu came out when it came to the response and said, tragic mistake. He acknowledges a tragic mistake in the strike on Rafah that killed dozens. Now, what's interesting is they've updated the article, which I'm not sure exactly. So this was on May 27th when it posted. Now they've updated this to say, Netanyahu says deadly Israeli strike in Rafah was this result of a tragic mishap. See my point that even the Associated Press, the rest of it, but how do you allow that to happen? What kind of journalistic integrity there? So I argue because mishap is quite different than mistake. You could argue that was a mishap. Oh, Hamas rockets exploded. Well, it was a mishap. You see my point? I think that's really manipulative. So realize that's how it was posted first, that he very clearly is quoted as saying that it was a tragic mistake in his own quote, in his speech. Right, in the speech, he says, despite our utmost efforts to not harm innocent civilians last night, there was a tragic mistake. And we changed that. I find that very, very telling. Now, UN chief, relief chief Martin Griffiths says, responding to Netanyahu's comments about that the massacre in Rafah yesterday was a mistake, that to call it a mistake is a message that means nothing for those killed, the grieving, or those trying to save lives. The point is that doesn't mean anything. So what it's supposed to do is somehow alleviate something when it doesn't change the reality of what happened. He says, quote, whether the attack was a war crime or a tragic mistake, which I don't know why it would be different if it was a claimed mistake. He says, for the people of Gaza, there's no debate. What happened last night was the latest and possibly most cruel abomination. Now, this is what I find even more interesting is that, so in English, Netanyahu came out and says, tragic mistake. However, in Hebrew, this is what he said. I do not despair and do not give up until the complete victory of Israel. And these are the time frame of all the same time. So how I always show you is the difference in what he thinks you want to hear in the United States. Then he says what they think you want to. These are politicians for you. But you're talking about genocide here. And the reason I didn't share this, I only like this because she puts it in quotes, which that's what she believes he means. And I agree. The final solution until extermination is complete. Either way you look at it, you just murdered children. You told the U.S. audiences it was a tragic mistake. Then you come out and say, we won't stop until we complete victory. It's very clear what he's doing. And that's disgusting. Now, here's where we get into the new edition of the lies, which I think it's hilarious how Piers Morgan has jammed himself right in the middle of this conversation. But, Mr. Fencewalker here is clearly getting kicked by both sides for doing that. But even as he has been championing Israel for so long, he steps out of line just barely and they go after him. He's been attacked by all of them. By the most screening Zionist propagandists, like the anyway, the ones we usually highlight. But now here's what we get. Open source intel says, well, turns out Piers Morgan owes a big apology. Hamas killed those civilians in Rafah. Oh, so now it's Hamas killed them? Even though what you're actually going to find in this conversation is, it says the Hamas terrorists it says Hamas terrorists that were bombed sat in a meeting and that there was a facility. They had ammunition, and basically the ammunition started exploding. Oh, so even then, this is the game like Pompeo is. Like, let's just pretend that there was ammunition there, and Israel bombs that ammunition, and that blows up and kills 50 people. You realize that's still Israel's fault, right? Israel carried out the attack. It doesn't matter what byproducts came about it, that you're responsible for that action. To pretend that because of what they had there that you bombed, it's their fault is childishly stupid. But this is what they keep doing. No matter what we do forever, it's all Hamas's fault because October 7th. That's actually their argument. But guess what? This is not even real. And this is what keeps happening. I've actually seen one of these already come out where somebody took this in the recording and then dubbed it over a video of the burning background and put it out as if this was a live video. And that's been removed as far as I can tell. And now they went with this one. This is the kind of reactive propaganda I keep seeing where they just jump to the next thing and go, does that work? Does that work? Oh, okay, how about both of them? Which one do you want? And people can't laugh about how stupid this is. And he says, I'm very sorry that Netanyahu called it a tragic mistake, which he did. He came out and said that, and now we're changing the story. So you can listen to this if you want. I think it's meaningless, but I think it's important if you want to understand. The context is just that they say there was an ammo depot, and they're saying, look, bags of money were flying in the air. They're just trying to make it sound like this is some kind of Hamas compound that they bombed, as opposed to a bunch of tents that you can see with your eyes. You can look at the bombing taking place and see that it was a bunch of tents. The main point to make, though, is this was November 8, 2023. Remember this one? Where they go, breaking, a recorded conversation between Hamas terrorists and Gazans reveal that they're using ambulances. And guess what? They lied. This is a quick clip from, and this is Channel 4 News, mainstream media. They broke this down as a lie. Remember, we talked about this. The whole point was that they proved that these were separate recordings that were put together, that they edited things, that there was Arabic words that were misspoken, the syntax didn't even lie. The point is you could prove this was not an Arabic-speaking person who was pretending to be. How bad are they at this? You all remember this conversation. It was huge. This was proven by mainstream media, which shouldn't make it any more important because they lie about everything. But the point is that if you have the evidence, you have independent media, and then even mainstream media calling this out, it's kind of hard to deny what's happening. So this should very clearly make you go, hey, this random audio recording is supposed to prove something from people that have been caught lying about audio recordings? You realize we have video evidence of them bombing children's tents, bombing people, and the statements of how they want to do this sort of thing. There's the videos of them filming themselves burning people's houses down. And what they do is come out with a recording the next day after he's already called a mistake and go, oh, see? Proven. I mean, I just don't think I think they've either always been this bad at this and just had such a control over people in power, or something has shifted, because this is pathetically bad. And here's the newest angle of this. Oh, guess what? Breaking news. There's also a huge tunnel down there that we found that we can't show you. But here's a graphic. Do you realize that they've even had corporate media when they go, can we see it? No, we can't show you. It's dangerous. You might fall in. That was actually one of the times they said that. But this is from today. Breaking news, a long terrorist tunnel in Rafah containing dozens of missiles and stuff. But here's a video graphic we made, sort of like we made the graphic of under Al-Shifa that was proven to be false. I mean, guys, this is laughable. Yet, I think it's what you do when you're desperate. What else are you going to do? So that's very clear. And by the way, the evidence that we've shown before that, watch the previous show about how obviously the multiple angles, the evidence is on the ground, even journalists that have documented it, the whole process through, they've lied about this from day one. And they've bombed safe areas, according to everybody, countless times. They bombed safe areas. They bombed the areas they're supposed to go to. They bombed them on the way. Remember, I talked about this with Adam, the very first example on October 10th. They bombed the crossing going to to Egypt. And that's when the very first time they shut it down. They bombed the trucks that were coming through the very first so many days. Egypt, the internet, UN called it out. Everybody called it out. So why is anybody even debating whether this is happening? So now let's get into the US side of this, which is really, really disconcerting just to see how much, they must be compromised. I don't really understand how they can destroy everything that they've been building. Not stuff that we should want, it's a positive thing, but destroy everything they've been building, destroy their own reputations, as bad as they already were, to maintain something that they already see is clearly what the world recognizes as genocide. How do you make sense of that? So here's a reporter asking Kirby that we've seen them kill civilians, and Americans can see their tax dollars going to this. Can you explain how this isn't a major operation? This is really, really bad.
Said tanks are moving along the corridor, but we are seeing tanks in Rafah. We've now seen strikes continue to kill civilians, including children. Yeah. Just for, an average American who's watching their taxpayer dollars go to this, can you explain to them how this isn't a major military operation? Or just maybe it would help to explain what is a major ground operation when it comes to the Biden administration.
I already did that, but I'm happy to do it again. Now, first of all, I am not the IDF spokesman, and this is not Tel Aviv. This is the White House press briefing room. And I am not, today or any other day, going to take it upon myself to speak to Israeli military operations, the planning, the intent, and the tactics that they're using. You should be asking Admiral Hagari that question. He's the IDF spokesman, not me. What I will tell—
So first and foremost, you can see that they're very clearly distancing themselves, at least in Kirby's mindset here. We're not doing this. That's them. Go over there. But very clearly been defending this, been arming this, been funding this the whole time. So that's a pretty weak argument. They're asking you, Kirby, because we all know, including these fake journalists in front of you, that you guys are responsible. Not entirely, but clearly, you could even argue 50-50 at this point. At the very least, complicity. So yes, it's a valid question. You are allowing this to continue, and the world remembers that.
Value is that what we have seen is essentially, so far, what the Israelis said they were going to do. They were going to close down the crossing to shut off the revenue to Hamas that comes across that crossing.
And occupy the corridor, which I'm going to show you in a minute, is a violation of the Camp David Accords. But who cares about international law? Clearly not the U.S. government.
at least for a while. And they were going to go after Hamas terrorists in as precise a way as possible, that they were not going to, quote unquote, smash into Rafah with a lot of ground forces. As you and I speak here today, that is still the case. We have not seen them smash into Rafah. We have not seen them go in with large units, large numbers of troops, in columns and formations, in some sort of coordinated maneuver against multiple targets on the ground. That is a major ground operation. We have not seen that. What we've seen is they have targeted tunnels. They have definitely done airstrikes. This one with tragic results, but not all of them with tragic results. And yes, they are moving some armored vehicles along a corridor on the outskirts of Gaza, along a corridor, by the way, that they told us they were going to use.
Got it. So they're on the ground, they're going in, they're bombing from the air, but totally not a major, just a minor. These are semantics. It's a word game to maintain some kind of illusion. But there's an important point in all of this. So you're not allowing the ground operation, which would what? Minimize civilian casualties or not?
So everything we're seeing, and we can't see everything, but everything that we can see tells us that they are not moving in a major ground operation in population centers in the center of Rafah.
Okay.
But as I also said in my opening statement, we're going to watch this hour by hour.
Okay. So the important point here, guys, and this is very clear. He's saying that if they're going in on the ground with a targeted, ground assessment, so like a ground operation where you have individually, the whole point is that would be what they would, the surgical conversation. And they're saying, we're not allowing that. The U.S. government, we're saying that's a red line. We will not allow a major operation. And we're okay with a limited operation, which apparently translates to indiscriminate bombing from the sky. You getting my point? So what the U.S. government is doing is essentially demanding that they continue to do the thing that's causing the civilian casualties. Even though I think it's clear that the the occupation forces of the Israeli government are happy to continue killing in whatever form indiscriminately because they hate Palestinians. But the argument should be that if you were doing the right thing, which is the worst lens to lay over this, that a ground operation, which is what I've been saying from the beginning, would be the best way to minimize the civilian casualties, because then you could go in and individually address each situation as opposed to just bombing entire apartment buildings. So it's obvious to see that by this weird, intentionally manipulative construct, you're guaranteeing the ongoing killing of civilians and then calling that a minor operation. So it's all good. Think about that for a second. So you're keeping them from doing the ground operation that would potentially, in a normal sense, minimize civilian casualties. And you're calling that the acceptable reality because it's minor. I mean, it really is disgusting. They know what they're doing, guys. I'm not going to say that the argument is they're trying to make more civilian casualties, but you know how I think about that. I find that very plausible. But in any case, they're keeping it stuck in a situation that's best for them politically, even though they know that is guaranteeing more civilian casualties. That is really messed up. Nothing new. Now, here's another example. Decentered News put this out, and this is Matt Miller doing the same damn thing. As they write genocidal word games. Here's what they had to say.
Comes to the continuation of Israel using precision-guided munitions in Rafah. At this point, the U.S. still supports that.
We have made no change to our policy.
So is it a yes or no?
We have made no change to our policy. We have made clear that if there was a full-scale military operation, there would be some change, but as of yet, it's not a change.
All right, same game. Exactly the same game. So it's just minor. So we can keep allowing civilian casualties to die at this high rate. But if they went in surgically, then that's off limits.
There was a full-scale military operation, there would be some change.
We oppose a major military operation in Rafah. It's no secret that they want to conduct a major military operation there. We have made clear that we oppose such an operation. We have made clear we don't want to see a major military operation. What is important from our perspective is that we not see a major military operation. This does look like the prelude of a major military operation. We have not yet seen that operation commence. It is not our assessment that a major military operation has begun at this point. We don't want to see a major military operation. They have said this is a limited operation. This does appear to be a limited operation so far.
On Rafah, you said that your understanding is that this is a very limited operation. So the Israelis can conceivably do a number of limited operations. In other words, collectively it will be a big operation, but they can strike this area of Rafah and that area of Rafah and so on. Would that always be, would that also be okay with you?
So I'm not going to speculate about some hypothetical scenario that may happen in the future.
Doesn't that bother you when they do that? You mean aside from when you do it literally every day, constantly, when you'll happily theorize about Russia might do if we don't stop them, or what Iran will do if we don't act today? That's what you do constantly. You just don't want to theorize about this question because it makes you look bad. Of course, nothing new.
Future, but obviously there is a point where a series of limited operations are one large one.
I mean, isn't that exactly what you're there for, right? Well, what happens if they don't stop? I mean, these are basic questions. Well, I'm not going to theorize about what might happen if we don't stop. Well, that's exactly what you're here for, man. It's pathetic. The way I think what it shows you is that people like this, as I've said before, even ones that are good at this job, everybody knows you're lying. You know that they know you're lying. And so it's very difficult for even someone good at this job.
But obviously, there is a point where a series of limited operations are one large one. That's just as a theoretical point is obviously true.
On a scale of limited versus large military operation, like what is acceptable for you? Like where is this line for you, United States, where you're going to say like, okay, this is now large scale operation and we don't support that?
I'm not going to get into trying to define it here.
Yeah, God forbid. What is your job, Matt? We know, to lie to people and obfuscate the truth. But as Censored News points out, so a full-scale or major operation, the supposed line in the sand, means whatever they want it to mean, and possibly nothing at all. And again, to reiterate the most important part of this, what they're doing is demanding that they don't go in on the ground. And that's the major. But they instead bomb indiscriminately from the sky. That's the minor operation. So they're guaranteeing indiscriminate killing of civilians, even though it's probably going to be similar to the people on the ground. The point would be that it's objectively supposed to be more surgical when you've got people going. That's what we said from the very beginning. Go into Gaza and go building by building and go after Hamas. That of course, that's more difficult. God forbid you should do something difficult. The point is that they would get annihilated. These people that have been spending the last 75 years beating up women and children, as we can see, are undisciplined and bad at what they do. It's not my opinion. It's self-evident at this point, as they're making TikTok videos and posting as they're wearing lingerie. This is not a disciplined army, guys. It's not even an army as far as I can tell. It's a bunch of maniacal people that are killing individuals for no reason. Not every single IDF member, but the by and large reality is what we can see. Guys, it's been proven to us. They're constantly putting these things out. And so we have to realize that they are just fulfilling what they have told you they're going to do, which is the end of all of Palestine. Now, Daniela points out the exclusive footage from Al Jazeera shows you what he briefly pointed to, which was Israeli tanks. So now you've got Israeli tanks advancing into Rafah City. You've got indiscriminate bombing from the sky in multiple locations. You've got snipers taking people out. You've got them surrounding certain buildings, but that's all a minor operation. So, we in fact have ground forces, but still minor though, just as long as they just say whatever they want. That's how this is going to continue. Yunus Tarawi points out that Israeli military has intensified its attacks on Rafah. This is as of yesterday, entering central neighborhoods, besieging Tel Sultan area from the east. Totally still a minor operation though. Overnight, the military massacred 16 people in the city. This is after the last one we talked about, including a family of 7 people meters away from the massacre 2 days ago. 4 are women and children. Totally minor, according to the U.S. government. Now, remember, as Saul Rod points out, the propaganda versus the reality. Biden was saying, well, if they invade Rafah, I'm not supplying the weapons. That was May 8th, excuse me. That's when they started playing the game with minor versus major. Well, that was no distinction before. You did that to give yourself an out because they started invading Rafah. And let's not forget, they've been bombing Rafah for months now, as we've been showing you, long before this game started being played. So what's the real difference if we're just simply bombing indiscriminately from the sky? And of course, now the reality is that they're using U.S. weapons, and we can prove this. U.S.-made munitions were used to kill the people in the Rafah tents. So complicity is undeniable from every possible angle. And this is nothing new. The U.S. government funds the most dangerous people on the planet, everywhere you look. And many of them don't even talk about. Groups that have documented this over the international and NGOs have documented that and I think what they use is people that are committing war crimes, people that, would ultimately use these weapons to undermine democracy or kill individuals. The vast majority of them are armed by the U.S. government. It's not hard to prove. And we're not even talking about the main, like Israel or Saudi Arabia. But how just do those two alone not show the point? Abdullah H. Hamid points out nearly 50 massacred, which, by the way, has apparently gone up despite the games being played by the numbers by certain corporate media platforms or apparently Instagram posts and people saying something less is enough for people like Michael Rappaport to claim, oh, I thought it was 50. It's because they're just disgusting people that can't acknowledge people being killed. But it says 50 people massacred yesterday in Rafah, apparently not a bloodbath. 7 killed in Ukraine, according to the BBC, it's a bloodbath. That's how this works. The dehumanization of Palestinians continues with the support of mainstream media. You can see as they're writing about this in regard to Rafah, they say, well, despite the appalling scenes from last night, the ground forces still appear to be acting somewhat cautiously. Oh, wait, the ground forces. Hold on. I thought that wasn't happening. Too late. The operations so far have not resulted in a bloodbath. That was the direct statement from BBC. So 50 people burned alive in their tent. Oh, it's not a bloodbath yet. But 7 killed in a war in Ukraine. It's a bloodbath. People are ridiculous. Now, Mohammed Shihada also points out that 48 hours later, after the Rafah massacre, not a single mainstream media outlet covered Israeli soldiers mass burning civilian homes in Rafah while they were doing this and demolishing them with we've shown you many of these. Laughing about it while they bulldoze people's houses while they're burning alive in tents. Immense satisfaction and joy. You can see it in their faces as they're literally posting images of them burning down buildings behind them. Imagine if those were Hamas militants posing for such pics at Israeli kibbutzism. How many Arab savagery headlines would there be? Now let's talk about this. Oh, and this is a couple of follow-ups in regard to Rafah in general that make some points that kind of a few all over one about apartheid, one about the food aid discussion. But I want to play Nora Erakat's conversation here about what happened to the children, of course. But I'll let her speak for herself. She makes some excellent points here. But just reading what she wrote here, babies felt their skin melt off before asphyxiating. Yet the U.S. media asks about how Zionists feel. That's who she's talking to.
There's part of the political fabric of the Palestinian movement, and I wonder how you think of it from the Jewish perspective when they say this is a force that has called for the end of the Jewish state. How could you ask those 7 million Jews in Israel to find a way to live alongside Hamas? What would you say to that?
This is not an objection from Jewish people around the world. This is an objection from Zionists, be they Jewish Zionists, be they American Zionists, be they Christian Zionists, even if they are Muslim Zionists. They believe in a state that it is exclusively a Jewish demographic majority at the expense of an indigenous population whose land must be taken from them and who must be constantly dispossessed and forced into exile. This equation in and of itself is unsustainable, has been determined as a form of apartheid by human rights legacy organizations like Human Rights Watch, as well as Israeli or human rights organizations like B'Tselem. Apartheid is a regime by which law and policy is used in order to maintain the racial superiority of one group over another. It is only through that thorough dehumanization of the racial other that this genocide is possible, that it has been accepted that babies be burnt alive in plastic tents for their displacement, who are suffering from a famine without access to hospitals and burn units, where we can still be asking the question about whose safety is now at risk and should be prioritized.
So her whole point is, the question is, how are they supposed to accept these people? That's the question, after they just burn children alive in tents and everything else for the last 75 years, right? Again, her point is exactly right. It's not about Jewish people. It's about Zionist manipulators. It's not, and on top of all of that, the whole framing of the question is ridiculous, seeing as how Hamas has updated his charter a long time ago to explicitly highlight that Zionism is what they're focusing on. Now, of course, you could say that they're lying, but to say that that is not true because you disagree with it is ridiculous. You at least have to acknowledge that they don't say that anymore, and maybe it's possible that they don't think that anymore if they ever did. But nope, it's because they secretly lie because they hate us. Well, that's not a factual point. You're making this up to base it on what you want to be the reality, which it could be. And on top of that, the idea being that right now, the explicit and the obvious majority of the conversation from within resistance groups and the majority of Palestinian conversation wants a two-state solution based on the 67 borders. that explicitly is about creating a state that allows Israel to exist. And all they can do is continue to scream about how they want him to die. And even then, all they point at are the supposed leaders of Hamas that are comfortably set up in Qatar that are protected by Israel. The one they funded, understand. And here, I'll quickly play this since I'll play it afterward, actually. So here's a point that, in following up about the apartheid point, I said, and this is a clip that somebody else put out, using Michael Rappaport to, which is very easy to do, to highlight that he's ridiculous and wrong. But I said the facts are easy to prove. And as someone like Zachary Foster highlights, PhD in history of Palestine from Princeton, that it's not very complicated. Despite all of their narratives and all the lies and the screaming, it's pretty simple to understand what's going on. The best they have are uninformed, dishonest screamers like Mikey Rappaport here, because anyone who, with integrity and 2 brain cells rubbed together, have recognized what Zionist-controlled Israel is truly doing. It's apartheid. And I'll show this afterward. This is the clip that she put out. It's fantastic.
The apartheid. This right here is Route 4370, nicknamed Apartheid Road, because one side is for Israelis and the other for Palestinians. It allows for illegal Israeli settlers to quickly and easily go between their illegal settlements in the West Bank and Jerusalem, while Palestinians require a permit and need to go through checkpoints. This is Al-Shahadat Road in the Palestinian city of Al-Khalil, also nicknamed Apartheid Road, because Palestinians are quite literally not allowed to use it, while Israeli cars, illegal settlers, and tourists can. Also, the Israeli military randomly imposes curfews and restricts Palestinians' movement around their own homes and neighborhoods. Here are a plethora of checkpoints that Palestinians are subjected to for their most mundane daily tasks and routines, like for work, medical care, education, or religious purposes. And of course, Israelis don't have to go through these. This is a swimming pool in an illegal settlement in the West Bank with water supply roughly 4 times greater than that provided to Palestinian communities, 180 of which don't have access to running water. And what does this lead to? Drying up of the wells, the collapse of farming villages, disappearing crops, and their basic daily needs are not being met. So while illegal settlers are sometimes just a few hundred meters away enjoying swimming pools, Palestinians become forced to work for these settlers who control all of the agriculture. Or Palestinians are forced to move, so just another form of ethnic cleansing. So on top of living under a brutal occupation and harsh military rule, Palestinians are in a vicious cycle of poverty and unemployment. Not to mention, they live under constant threat of house demolitions because they don't have the proper permits. And when they do apply for the proper permits, Israel denies 98% of those applications.
Keep telling you
Just
that.
another thing illegal Israeli settlers don't have to endure. So yeah, there's a little bit of apartheid for you.
Exactly. And the point is, you get these people like Mike out there screaming about these falsehoods, and people listen. I don't know why, quite frankly. They're shockingly stupid. But here's what I posted under, for example, Canary Mission, who says, it's not about facts, it's about power. Watch these 3 prominent anti-Israel activists admit their accusations that Israel's an apartheid state is a lie, which is not even remotely what actually happens. It's really bad. Basically, just to sum it up, because I don't want to play it, it's a waste of time. This is one of them, and all they say is, what they're saying is, it's not about facts, it's about power. And that's supposed to mean that she's lying about this, and it's not. The context is not there. What is she talking about? She's talking about Israel meaning that, or it's absurd because these individuals are not. These are activists. Why does what they say have any bearing on whether or not it's an apartheid state? The simple point was that's the best you can do. I said. Meanwhile, here's what the leading human rights groups in the world say, including the leading Israeli human rights group. All of them are an apartheid state, as well as a highly respected Israeli historian, Human Rights Watch, an apartheid state. They say. Amnesty International, it's an apartheid state. Here's B'Tselem, an Israeli human rights group. So it says a regime of Jewish supremacy from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean. This is apartheid. And the clip you've seen many times, it's Avi Shalom, who is telling you, based on his research and his own experience, that yes, obviously it's an apartheid state.
Zionism is racism. Israel cannot be both. Israel is either a racist Jewish state or it's a democratic state for everybody. And that's what I would like Israel to be. I'd like a democratic solution, one state with equal rights for all its inhabitants. Your organization, Human Rights Watch, issued a report last year about Israel, and the conclusion was it is an apartheid state. And there are 4 major human rights groups in the last 2 years who issued similar reports, reached the same conclusion. Israel is an apartheid state. So apartheid is racism. Apartheid is discrimination. But Israel is the only member of the United Nations that I know which is officially racist. And I say this because of the July 2018 nation-state law, which says the Jews have a unique right to self-determination in Israel. Unique means exclusive.
Yes.
It means Arabs have no right to self-determination. It means even if Arabs became a majority, they would still have no right to self-determination. So most certainly Zionism is a racist ideology, and it is largely responsible for the Nakba that has unfolded throughout the last century and continues today.
Now, of course, you could argue that he's wrong or that the human rights groups are wrong. Certainly an argument. Of course, you're welcome to make that argument, but I think it's absurd to make the argument that ultimately every leading human rights group in the world, almost everyone actually, has made this argument based on facts. It's not just a statement you can read for yourselves, and they outline explicitly what it is, why they make this conclusion, or the fact that Israel was extremely involved in South Africa's apartheid, but that's not need to talk about that, or that leading human rights group, or rather the leading historians or people. I mean, it's across the board, guys. Even then, you could argue it could be wrong because it's certainly possible. But if all we're doing is going, everybody that has any standing in this conversation says it's an apartheid and it meets every definition of an apartheid state, but Israel disagrees. So you're all crazy. That's what people will argue in the comments. Oh, your blind belief in authority is pathetic. And it's like, hold on. So you're the one blindly taking what a government says at face value, and I'm the one appealing to authority? I'm highlighting a round conversation of multiple angles. It's sad. But again, this is why people, this is the best they can do. It's pretty pathetic. Now, here's an example of going back to the conversation of Rafah. Michael Rappaport says, video of everything except the hostages. And what he's showing right here, for those that haven't seen this, it's brief. It's a very disgusting video. If you have children watching, I recommend you don't let them see this. That this is the video of a child with its head blown off. I'm only going to show it once just so you could see it, so you could see this before. Hey, this is the guy that was holding up his child that was killed in the Rafah tents, that was dead with his head blown off. Now, of course, countless people there are in the comments and different Israeli officials, that's a doll, it's fake, despite the fact that it's verifiably real. And it's easy to prove based on the time frame, based on what you can see. These are people being pulled out of burning out. The bottom line is, it is a real child. Michael Rappaport says, here's a video. He uses that video and says it's a video of everything except the hostages. That's the point I was making earlier. What kind of sociopath can make that kind of argument? And I simply said, what if it was your child, Michael? He apparently has kids. What kind of father can make that argument? I said, you are a soulless monster. Oh, and the house hostages you pretend to care about likely also got killed by the same indiscriminate bombing. That anyone has to explain that to you is ridiculous. But you likely know that and don't care. I'm continually shocked, even with these people that I know are crazy. And they just keep doubling down, screaming about the only hostages as you're watching people die. It's just the worst of humanity, guys. We're every day it becomes more and more clear. The people that are standing by this are the worst people of society. And it's not just because of Israel or Zionism. It's about anybody that can stand by what we're seeing. If the same argument probably could have made during World War II, during the Rwanda genocide, including the fact that we know for a fact that Israel supported before, beginning, during, and after the Rwanda genocide. It's a verifiable fact. I've talked about it on my show. Haaretz has covered it. They funded the people that committed it. They gave them weapons. The bottom line is, in the midst of that, the people that were going, it's okay, look the other way, it's actually the right thing to do, those are the worst people in the world. This is who we're talking about. Remember who these people are. Now, October 7 Fact Check highlights the reality of the children being killed, which I think is an important point, because what do we keep hearing? The most moral army in the world. We've done the most anybody's ever done to minimize civilian casualties, in particular children, right? Well, Israel has called its civilian death ratio, quote, tremendously positive. Well, I guess that's correct if you're thinking from a math perspective, positive meaning more than you could imagine, and a unique in the world, they say, which also actually correct. Not the way they want you to think about it, though. It says, with our newly published data set, which you can verify for yourself, I'll show it to you, we can now compare child casualty ratios in Israel and Gaza. Not even with other warfare, which is probably exponentially more crazy, like talking about the idea we've already made clear that I think right now it's more children killed in just this time frame than all world wars or all the wars combined over the same time frame of the world. The point is clearly that maybe don't cite me on that because I'm pulling this off the top of my head, but the statistic was made clear, and this was put forward by people with standing, United Nations, human rights groups. The point is, you could see clearly the raw numbers. Israel has killed over 300 times more children compared with what happened on October 7th. Right? The amount of children killed by Hamas, supposedly the bloodthirsty child killers, they want you to think they're 40 dead babies. That was a lie, right? The percentage of children killed by Hamas on October 7th was 2.8%. The percent of children killed so far by Israel in Gaza, 31.6%. 31.6%. How is this not a war on women and children when you can see that almost more than half who have been killed? Even though we can see, quite frankly, most of these are innocent people anyway, women, men, or children. But I think that's a very obvious fact. Now, here they highlight the actual data sets, which you can go through. When's the last time Israel did that? Never. They never give you the actual data set, the information. And you can look through this for yourself. And they're showing whether the current status. It's very important. This is a very, very, very extensive data breakdown that you can verify for yourself and cites right back to the UN numbers, which they'll dismiss anyway because they're Hamas, right? On that note, using this to segue from that, seeing as though this is where the numbers come from, let's reiterate the point about the aid. So here we are again, showing you this overwhelming number. So from the 7th to the 28th of May, only 1,267 trucks have come through. Now, this breakdown is additionally showing you the humanitarian sector versus the private sector, right? So the humanitarian sector would arguably be, I've actually been thinking about this earlier, and I wanted to see a breakdown in here. In any case, I would believe that would mean the human rights groups, UNRWA, and so on, versus private sector being the governments. I'm not sure. I don't want to sit with that though. I don't want to stand with that because I don't know if that might mean private companies that do so. But in any case, that's not the point. Either way, it shows you that they're lying to you about damn near everything, seeing as how 500 trucks before, including fuel, every day came through and they were still food insecure. People were still going hungry. Now, 1,267 in the last 3 weeks, which breaks down to 60 a day. 60. And also realize that not a single day has gone by where they've surpassed that number. Not a single day. So they have guaranteed that it's going to slow increase into famine, which is what's happening, despite all of the screaming lies they continue to push. And we just showed you the breakdown on the days themselves that they lied about how many they claim went through, even on individual days. But even if they did put through 600 trucks yesterday, which they didn't, the number of the breakdown across the month still shows you a guaranteed decline into famine. It's just horrific. And here's Aviva Klampas lying blatantly in every way. 465 trucks went into Gaza yesterday. That's not true. It's provably not true. But even then, the point is the same, as I said right down here. I said, you are lying, and anyone can check for themselves. That must be very uncomfortable for you. The point is that, let's just say 1,000 trucks went through that day. The reality of the entire day, I would argue that they should do that if they were really trying to fool people. Bring through a whole bunch and then do what she's doing and go, oh my God, look at all the little aid that came through. And then 0, 0, 0, 0, which is what they're doing. In the beginning, there was a week plus where they brought through nothing, guaranteeing a jump start in the famine. And then they've done the same thing more than once. In May, they went down to 0 for a few days. It's guaranteed. The world can see this, I believe. But her point, 0 hostages came out. Well, what is that supposed to mean? Is there an agreement to do so? No, you've turned those down. In fact, there was already an agreement that they put forward that should you have given unfettered aid, they would have let hostages out. The first 2 weeks, multiple agreements that were way, way better than the ones they're seeing now. Just don't invade Gaza. We'll give you the hostage back. That was one of the offers. Netanyahu turned it down. It's now been proven. It's even admitted by Israeli media. So when they keep playing this game, they don't care about the hostages. They're even more disgusting because they know that and don't care, and they're trying to lie to you about it while they allow them and cheer on the bombing in the places where they know they probably are. Disgusting. They're all very bad people. Now, here's Brian Mast, one of them, very clearly a person who is actively fighting for the Zionist agenda. Now, see, I love things like that. Like right there, I guarantee someone's going to act like I meant Jewish people because that's the best they can do. When I said one of them, I'm talking about authoritarian monsters who are allowing genocide. But he writes, Joe Biden built a port using $312 million of your tax dollars. Yeah, that's disgusting. And it wasn't Joe Biden. It was your government, including Brian Mast, whether he voted for it or not. Your government allowed this. That's the point. The only way they can keep their game going is to convince you that it's the bad guy Democrats or the bad guy Republicans and keep you fighting yourselves. I hope people are not falling for it anymore. But here's what he says. To help Hamas replenish their stockpile. It's the same thing as Pompeo saying the ICC works for Hamas. It's lowbrow. It's dumb. It is lacking evidence. You can certainly argue that somehow what he did here was secretly to arm Hamas, which is what that means. But does anybody believe that's what's happening? No, what he's just really trying to do is use this as a partisan wedge issue to argue that what he did was simply supporting Hamas. And then he just frames that as to help replenish them. Because I guess what he would probably argue is that by doing this, he's allowing time for them to rearm. But that's not the same thing. It's being fast and loose with important facts because it works for his agenda. That's dumb. That's childish. These people are manipulators. And this guy literally is part of the IDF. That's crazy. And I simply said, do you see how you're getting ratioed on every ridiculous thing you post? I mean, look at the ratio, guy. Nobody believes this person, not even his own followers. It's because you're cartoonish about the way you push your lies. Replenish their stockpile? You mean with the weapons they delivered to Israel, which is what's already happened? And he knows that, guys. Since Israel funds Hamas, maybe, as I pointed out, my joke is that maybe that is what's happening, seeing as how Israel funds them. Maybe that's real. The point is obvious that Israel's already been given weapons through that pier by the United States. And he's pretending that Biden has stopped the shipments. It's all theater. They're all playing their part. Maybe they don't even know that. But on the point of the pier, you'll find it very interesting that apparently there was a little mishap, which I'm wondering maybe it was by design. Maybe this is a way to keep this game going. Or maybe it just shows how completely inept and incompetent these people are. I'll play the clip and you can listen for yourself. This is what just happened with the pier.
You can see a piece of the American pier that was floating off the coast of Gaza. Now, overnight, the Americans were moving the two floating piers to the port of Ashdod in southern Israel when one of the pieces got detached from the line and floated ashore here in Ashdod.
Now, why are they moving the pier? Is there a problem? If the pier was about simply setting up a corridor to bring in humanitarian aid, then it wouldn't need to be moved. Something else is going on here, and I think we know this was a plan that was put forward a long time ago by Netanyahu that had nothing to do with food or Gazan people, and it was pushed before for other reasons. It was pushed in the beginning after October 7th for a place to put Gazan people. It's the exact same plan. Then just come out later and go, oh, here, it's for food now. And they all jump to it because these are all a bunch of manipulative liars that are bowing to the interest of Zionism. The point is that this is something other than food aid, and they haven't even begun to do that. And the only reason they needed the argument for that is because Israel's not letting aid through anywhere else. And then they allow Israel to be the part that checks in aid from the pier. So they never expected this to helping Gaza people. At best, it was about making it look like they were going to. And then they brought in weapons, they brought in personnel. This is more about occupation and control. And now they're moving it. Oops, we lost control. So maybe it is that they're that inept, or maybe it's about trying to play the game like we're trying and we can't get there. You know, using their own incompetence to make it look like they're trying.
This U.S. Army vessel came to rescue that piece when it also got stuck. So right now the American...
Right, so the U.S. military goes in to get the thing they lost and they got stuck too. Sure sounds like they're doing well.
Americans are working with their Israeli counterparts to try and free this equipment, take it to Ashdod, and then ultimately deploy the pier once again off the coast of Gaza.
Very interesting. Okay, so that's where we are at the moment. Whereas Arnaud Bertrand writes and highlights this. Now, what I've seen different reports on this, in some cases seeming to suggest that maybe this is an indefinite suspension, but in other cases, like this Haaretz article saying that it is a temporary suspension. After what just happened, it seems very interesting to me. So you guys tell me what you think about this. He says $320 million for nothing. right? I mean, that's what we're talking. I don't think it was for nothing. I think there was a lot more that happened with all this. Possibly the very where a lot of these weapons came from. In any case, it's your money. Well, most people in this country do not support that. Not in the way that Brian Mass is trying to frame this, as if it's some focus on funding Hamas. It's about the fact that they're all using it to fund Israel and trying to manipulate you into thinking one way or the other, usually like the two-party paradigm does. But it says the irony of Biden building this to save face for his unequivocal support of Israel, and it ends up like this. Here's what the article says. The Pentagon, saying this, the operation of the floating dock in Gaza will be suspended at least for a week for repairs. Oh, meanwhile, they continue to starve to death. But we'll get there, don't worry. Is anybody buying that? I mean, I find that, let me look at this. Why is this whole thing is being shipped around and moved different locations? It simply says the Pentagon announced this evening the suspension of the operation to bring in aid, which hasn't even happened yet, into the Strip due to damage caused by the weather. According to her, the platform is down for at least a week. At the end of the week, 4 boats used to transfer the aid to the dock itself were swept away by the waves, and 2 of them reached the shores of Ashdod. That's what we just heard. In addition, one of the soldiers involved as operating the platform was injured in a work accident. I just don't even believe this. I mean, I'm just my personal gut feeling, but who knows? The entry of the aid into Gaza Strip through Rafah and Karam Shalom crossings in the south has almost stopped in the last 3 weeks. That's not what Elon Levy is crying about, screaming, we've gathered more aid. You just heard Klompus say 400 yesterday. They're all lying to you guys. Even the U.S. government is highlighting that. After Israel began a ground operation in the area, oh yeah, it was a ground operation. So I guess it was a major. It's funny how they're contradicting themselves everywhere. That's what happens when you lie about everything. And took control of the Rafah crossing, which is an illegal act. I'll show you next. Last week, the United Nations announced that as a result, there was a shortage in the organization's aid supplies, and that it was forced to stop distributing food to the Rafah city. Oh, is that what happened? A little quick shortage of supplies? You mean despite the endless string of trucks that you guys are letting rot in the street because you won't let it through? It's so overwhelming. You know, it's hard for those of us with morals and integrity to stand here and watch this, knowing that they know what they're doing. They know that we know what they're doing, and not just get overwhelmed. Oh, that's weird. Oh, that was just a different thing up here. This is the title right there. But just know that most of them probably won't be held accountable for it. That just makes me really very unhappy. But here's an important point. Here's what Naftali Bennett said. The IDF has secured the Philadelphia corridor, which separates Egypt from the Gaza Strip. Now, it's important. It's explicitly the point right there. Secured. Not occupied, of course, which is exactly what's actually happening. And I bet you they never give back the call in this area. It says this means that we can block the influx of weapons and ammunition from the Sinai into Hamas hands. Well, hold on. Weren't you saying that it was going through the tunnels? If apparently it's going through this checkpoint, that means you're involved because you completely control it on your side, despite the lies we keep getting told. Even Matt Miller got caught with that lie right in the beginning, remember? Oh, Hamas was there stopping it. That's not true. You guys are completely in control of your side of this. If we're going to pretend that you allowed Gaza to have unfettered access to Egypt, you're that's provably false. But then he goes on to say, Israel will continue to let the food in and medical supplies, but no more weapons. You mean continue to not do that? There's no continuing something you haven't been doing, and we can prove that. It says, this is profound strategic implications. From this moment on, Hamas is running out of arms and ammunition. It's just so sad because the reality is they ran out months ago, and they already stated this. Now, that doesn't mean they don't have any more, as we just saw, but it's already been acknowledged they ran out after 3 months. It's been exceedingly rare that they've been firing rockets. So my assumption is, I guarantee they probably have some channel somewhere, but overall, they're keeping these off to the side for important moments. But I could be wrong. Maybe they've got plenty more. But it says last time we held it was 2005, after which we evacuated the entire strip, including the corridor. Israel must retain this corridor indefinitely. What did I say? Now let's take a look at this. Oh, and on top of that, don't forget just the point about food. As the executive director for the Legal Center for the Freedom of Movement highlights, which we can prove in every other angle, on top of the fact that Kogat has been continually getting caught lying about what they claim is happening. Provably, which is the one I show you often about the bread they claim was coming out, even though they got caught using an old video, or the market they lied about, which was an old video that you can prove because the banner in the background showed that it was before October. I mean, they're bad at this. But this group, Kogat, is literally about coordinating the aid. But she says their Kogat is literally dumping the goods on the Karim Shalom crossing which can't be reached without Israel's coordination, and then mocking organizations like UNRWA that can't reach goods because of a lack of coordination during a famine. But the point here is about the corridor. IDF says it's gained tactical control. They're just trying to play word games of this corridor. And here's why this is very important. This is about the Camp David Accords. Now, first, what it says here, the framework. And this, well, actually, I'll read this first since this is the main point. I'll come back to the peace side of it. The main point here is that Israel agreed in this agreement to limit its forces to a smaller distance from the Egyptian border and to guarantee free passage between Egypt and Jordan, which both of the last parts aren't happening. But what the point is when they take this area, they are clearly violating two parts of this accord. The other part up here I find very interesting is this says in the framework for peace part of it, the agreed basis for a peaceful settlement of the conflict between Israel and its neighbors, not just Gaza and Palestine in general, but its other neighbors as well, is United Nations Security Council Resolution 242 in all its parts. Now, before we go forward, that's what this is. In that, and this is the point that I mentioned earlier, the 67 borders conversation, this is what Israel violated from day one and never did, and always blames the other side for no matter what happened, whether it's a rocket flying or whatever they claim is happening, they never did the first step, which was the withdrawal of Israeli forces from territories occupied in the recent conflict, which would mean all of Palestine for the most part, but in the agreement, it ended up being larger parts of what Gaza and West Bank really were. And they never did that. They just never moved away. And on top of that, it says termination of all claims or states of belligerency and respect for and acknowledgement of the sovereignty, territorial integrity, and political independence of every state in the area and their right to live in peace within secure and recognized boundaries free from threats or acts of force. Now, even if you want to pretend that the Palestinians only kept fighting and it wasn't, okay, what about Egypt? What about Jordan? What about every other place that they have, Lebanon, for example, where they've continued to occupy? They never actually upheld their side of the bargain. That's the resolution in regard to this was adopted unanimously by the UN Security Council in 1967. They never did this. Okay, so back to the other point. So that was the first part they never did. Then it says the framework itself consists of three parts. And this is in regard to the framework for the peace in the Middle East based on the Camp David Accords. The first part of the framework was to establish an autonomous self-governing authority in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip and to fully implement Resolution 242, which we just showed you, which they never did. So that part didn't happen. But when the idea of establishing a self-governing authority, this is the game they played with the election of Hamas. And remember, the whole point was about ensuring that that Gaza would be in power with Hamas and that the West Bank would have somebody else. At the time, it was Fatah. And the point being that they would make sure that they always were at odds so they would never agree. So there would never be a two-state solution. That in and of itself shows you the dishonest nature of what they're doing. But it says the accords recognize the legitimate rights of the Palestinian people, a process to be implemented guaranteeing the full autonomy of the people within a period of 5 years. Didn't happen. The representative on the Israeli side at that time insisted on the adjective, or no, it was the Israeli politician insisted on the adjective full to ensure that it was the maximum political right attainable, which I don't think that's the case. This full autonomy was to be discussed with the participation of Israel, Egypt, Jordan, and the Palestinians. The withdrawal of Israeli troops from the West Bank and Gaza was agreed to occur after an election of a self-governing authority to replace their military government, Israel. And guess what happened? They elected Hamas, so we're told, which I still argue was likely a manufactured event because that's what they used to argue this wouldn't be allowed. And all they did was go, well, we don't like that. We don't agree. Hamas is bad, so no deal. That's not how that works. So if they were allowing an election to them to vote in, they voted in a group, they're supposed to, okay, we'll back away unless you have, they didn't do that. There's just everything about this. Now that's larger points, but the main other point comes back to the idea that what they're currently doing in that corridor violates this agreement, but they don't care about any of this stuff. But they're going to force these things on everybody else. But the UN is Hamas, but you have to follow it if I tell you to. It's just a bunch of sullen children, guys. That's what these people are. Now, don't forget, the Greater Israel Project, as this great article from Matt Arrett, right? The Greater Israel Scheme and its global power play, a delusional recipe for Armageddon, highlights that they have designs, which don't forget, the settler that we just played, speaking about what they're going to do in Gaza, Smotrich, with his discussion on the podium with this symbol on it, are admitting that they're going to take places in Syria. They're going to take places in Jordan. They're going to take the explicit area that they're supposed to stay away from in the Sinai in Egypt. It's right there. And as it writes here, they're going to take 100% of Palestine in their designs, 100% of Jordan, 100% of Lebanon, 70% of Syria, 50% of Iraq, 33% of Saudi Arabia, Egypt up to the Nile. That's what their design is. That's what Israel's stated objectives are. They've made this clear everywhere. The Greater Israel Project is not a secret. And we're supposed to pretend that Hamas is going to march around the world and take over other countries should they get more power? Come on. It's shockingly clear what's really going on. Now, here's Brian Mast talking about the idea of hostages and who is in Gaza versus who is, or the Israeli Americans who are in Gaza, and ignoring the Palestinian Americans that have been there from the beginning. An American politician who has been very clear that the only thing he cares about is Israelis. Here's what he said. Oh, you know what? I don't think I grabbed that. Well, he says, don't forget there were, let me see. I did want to play that. Let me play it real quick. Let me grab this link real quick. Now, what we're going to get into as well is the point about UNRWA, which I think is very important, which comes to another point about what they just did, which is actually pretty shocking. The idea that suddenly UNRWA now owes them millions of dollars because UNRWA's been occupying Israel. That's the claim they just made. I mean, they're just making fun of the international community. And Israeli supporters are screaming that it's true. Well, what do you know? It turns out they were occupying. That's what Aviva Klampus put out there. It's just it's meant to make fun of the whole process. You can't just retroactively say, oh, now you're doing that, even though you've been allowing them to be there this whole time. Like, it's not the same dynamic as much as they want to pretend that it is. You've allowed them based on all sorts of agreements. And what they're doing is trying to create the dynamic to counterbalance the idea that they're occupying the area. It's really flimsy. People are laughing about it, quite frankly. But first and foremost, here's what Brian Mast said.
Brian Mast of Florida. He's a member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee and a retired Army Staff Sergeant. He's also volunteered and served alongside Israel's Defense Forces. Congressman, thank you for your service and happy Memorial Day to you.
Thank you.
That's a weird way he answered. I feel like he didn't like that he brought up his IDF activity. Tell me what you think, though. I mean, it's you can see that I almost feel like he lost part of his smile. I think it's because it's a very touchy thing right now. Most Americans are not okay with that, left or right. But watch. I think it's telling.
Forces. Congressman, thank you for your service of the House Foreign Affairs Committee and a retired Army Staff Sergeant. He's also volunteered and served alongside Israel's Defense Forces. Congressman, thank you for your service and happy Memorial Day to you.
Thank you.
I want to get your first response to some of the reports that we've got coming out of Israel tonight. There was the rocket attack, followed by the attack there. Israel is now investigating what.
Did you hear the way you just framed that? Well, there was the rocket attack, followed by that attack right there. That's Fox News for you. A rocket attack, followed by the attack right there. That's the framing of children being burned alive in their tents. And a rocket attack that killed nobody. But that's how you start. Rocket attack that killed nobody. And that attack over there, they killed 50 people, including children. But that's how we'll frame this. It's just overwhelming. These people know what they're doing, guys. Don't forget that.
Got coming out of Israel tonight. There was the rocket attack, followed by the attack there. Israel is now investigating what it strikes as it killed a couple of Hamas leaders. Also reports of a few dozen civilians who have died.
Not been killed, right? No, we didn't kill them. They have died. But they killed Hamas members, which I'm willing to bet you they weren't even actually there, or they don't care. Do we care that it's not proven? The Jabalia refugee camp, where they killed 200 people, they claim they killed the person. He turned out not even to be there. To what point do we realize that they don't even need to prove these things, that people like Brian Mast and Fox News will happily carry their water? They don't even need to prove it.
What's your reaction to that?
I think you look at two things. One, the fact that there are still rocket attacks threatening Tel Aviv, Israel. It shows you that the job is not done. The mission is not complete yet. They still have a mechanism to receive arms, whether through tunnels going into Egypt or other places. There is still a supply chain that is feeding Hamas. There are still Hamas fighters that are out there engaging in attacking Israel, and they still want to see no Israel exist. The other side of this that unfortunately we do not see out.
Guys, they just nuked, just really quickly. They just nuked the YouTube channel we were using. They just deleted the entire show we were just doing on YouTube. It just deleted. I just think it's hilarious. I didn't even get a notification from the thing. I just think that's hilarious. For those that might be listening, I'm going to open up the other channel. I think it's TLAV censored or something like that, and you can jump on that one. I just think that is absolutely perfect. So what you can see, what that shows you is that there are people that are watching. There are people that are monitoring what we're doing, and they're mass flagging these things to get them removed. We're doing good work. That's the point. It is breaking through. People are seeing the truth, and it terrifies them. So sorry for those that were in the YouTube chat. That's exactly why you shouldn't use YouTube, but we'll continue.
Is that there will continue to be civilian casualties if the world does not become up in arms about the fact that Hamas purposefully embeds themselves with civilians, purposefully places civilians in front of themselves, aid workers in front of themselves, purposely tries to use UNRWA as a location, their locations, to build tunnels for Hamas that go into Egypt and other places. As long as that's allowed to continue, then we will see what unfortunately the world doesn't want to see, which is a civilian killed here or a civilian killed there because of what Hamas does.
Well, the international pressure we have seen is for Israel to.
Oh, yeah. Civilian killed here, civilian killed there. Just the casual couple, or 50,000, whatever. Let's just mince words here. I mean, think about how disgusting that is. You can be you can be on Israel's side and still be rational about your conversation. What he just did is shockingly clear. He knows what he's doing. He's wildly downplaying what we're talking about. I mean, look, the whole point is if you're going to argue that they're justifiable deaths because of human shields, then why do you need to downplay the number? Why do you need to downplay the reality of what's actually happening if, according to you, it's all okay and justified, international law, human shields? Because because your own actions highlight that what you're doing is wrong, and you're doing it for Israel and Zionism. That's what's actually happening. Watch that. Listen to him again.
As long as that's allowed to continue, then we will see what unfortunately the world doesn't want to see, which is a civilian killed here or a civilian killed there because of what Hamas does.
Right. Every single one, no matter what we do. So when they just shot that guy in the face in the middle of the street, or the woman waving a white flag, Hamas did it because Hamas, bad guy. These are not serious people. Okay. These are active participants in a manipulation. These are people that are actively doing things against the human species, against the interest of Americans for a foreign country, acting like they represent you.
Well, the international pressure we have seen is for Israel to completely stop its offensive in Rafah. Do you think that this continuing international pressure has affected Israel at all?
There's no question that Israel sees the international pressure. But what's most stark to me is the fact that America is allowing itself, President Biden is allowing America to be pulled into this, and continually forgetting the fact that we have Americans currently being held by these terrorists. We have Americans that were killed on October 7 by these terrorists, and there has never been an expectation that there will be Americans sent to come get those Americans that are being held. That's what's going on with this administration. No guarantee that America is there for Americans. That's not what this country is about, especially on Memorial Day.
Just wild. So, as always, the point that I make is, well, it's odd, Brian, that you only care about the Israeli Americans. The few that you're talking about, as opposed to the over 600 Americans and Palestinian Americans who are trapped in Gaza, who you're bombing, who you're allowing to be killed. Isn't that very stark? I've made this point every time when they make this argument. Like, let's realize there was not just, and again, for me, it's no different. We're talking about human life. Whatever their religion, whatever their ethnicity, wherever they're from, human life matters, guys. And if we're talking about a Palestinian American, that matters. Not just because they're American, but because they're a human being. But in his mindset, he's focusing on Americans, right? Okay, so there's Palestinian Americans who are Palestinian, who also have American citizenship, who are trapped there. There's also Americans who are there for multiple reasons, who are trapped there. But because they're there on the side of Palestine, this American representative thinks they don't matter. Or at the very least, he'll only exclusively highlight the ones from Israel, most of which are Israelis who also have American citizenship. As far as I know, all of them, in fact. Either way, what we're talking about here is a American representative who's actively ignoring American suffering as long as it's on the side of Palestine, who's actively supporting Americans if and only they're supporting Israel or Israeli themselves. It's very, very disgusting. Now, not that it should matter, but I post the new YouTube thing in the Wire channel and elsewhere for those that want to see it. I just think it's hilarious. If you didn't hear me say that a second ago, YouTube has deleted the entire video with no comment because clearly it's working. People are seeing the truth, and I find that hilarious. Well, let's continue. Elon Levy says this war cannot end with Hamas free to continue smuggling the rockets that they have made Israelis' lives hell for the last 20 years. Oh, is that what? Last 20, huh? So we got, got the 40 years on you. But either way, the point is that the rockets that have hit a field and caused no damage almost every time, it's kind of hard to say, oh, I'm sorry, she skinned her knee when she screamed when you turned on the sirens when nothing was happening. Right? That's the equivalent to what we're talking about here. That panic attacks and skinned knees are usually the bulk of what happens in these. And I'm not diminishing the fact that there are cases where people get killed. The point is that when you're comparing these things and saying that this is all that matters while ignoring 75 years of brutal occupation, rape, murder, and theft, and destabilization, ethnic cleansing, and then you add what we're talking about now, and your point is we can't let them continue to fight back because of the rockets that don't cause damage. Well, the smuggling is the point here. Oh, and this is what it says here. Breaking, the IDF says it's established an operational control over the Philadelphia corridor. Same game. But I said here that, are you sure Israel is not involved in the smuggling operation? Here's the clip, by the way, you can watch for yourself. And that, oh, by the way, right there's that highlighted quote that I'm talking about from National Geographic. I think it was 2012. I could be wrong on the date. It says a handful of rockets are launched by young militants hired by local merchants whose profits would decline if Israel's closure were further relaxed. Read the article for yourself. I went over this in depth. It very clearly highlights that this is right in plain view of Egypt. I think they're very aware of this, and Israel as well, seeing as how they're in the control of the crossing. The point, not the corridor, understand, the crossing on their side. Right now, they're controlling the whole damn thing, and that's violating their agreement with Egypt. The point is that this, I believe, is in conjunction, in some cases, with Israel. Because some of these are going to that side. The point is, I think overall, it's a manufactured illusion. Knowing that they were funding Hamas at this point, and they still are, the leadership, I argue. But either way, I don't think that this is completely, I think what we're talking about is a manufactured game to continue the justification to do what they want. You can watch this clip. I think it's important. But if we're talking about the smuggling and everything and the allowance of this, or the funding of Hamas in general, which I post here, you can't pretend like this is a one-sided game. Yes, they funded Hamas. Yes, they gave them $1.4 billion that the former leader of Shin Bet and the former prime minister admit to in Haaretz in 2023 that he said that they were going to continue to fund Hamas to make sure they kept this two-state solution from happening, or that the leader of Mossad went to Qatar in 2020 to petition Qatar to keep funding Hamas. It's all very, very easy to prove. But odd how none of them have ever addressed this point, despite being that very clear and easy to prove. Again, many times I've said this. This is why they're losing control, because they're either bad at this or they don't know how to do it anymore. Brian Mast goes on to say, Joe Biden sent more than $730 million of your tax dollars to UNRWA, to the UN group that's been allowing funding and aid to go through to the Palestinians and has kept track of the right of return, which is what they're terrified of. And he says, which employ the terrorists. No, they didn't, Brian. It's been a lie from the beginning. And even the US and Canada and other countries have said Israel hasn't provided any evidence to back that up. But he just keeps screaming it anyway because he worked for somebody else. He says Joe Biden spent $312 million on your tax dollars for the port, which you all are a part of, which the government allowed. The point is that this is not about Hamas, right? This is about Israel. It's about you creating narratives, even counter to the facts, in order to justify what Israel's doing, gaslighting for genocide. So remember, they did not provide any evidence to back this up. It's now been definitively proven, as far as I can tell, that most of what they claim were lies, faking audio recordings, forcing testimony while in custody. And the people they claim that they prove were from Hamas, that even the UN and human rights groups broke down the actual things they showed you, and the best they were showing is some kind of tangential overlap. That this guy was in the same communication group as this other guy, therefore they're all Hamas. To them, they're all Hamas, and that's the point. But here's what just happened. I think this is important. We talked about them declaring UNRWA a terrorist organization, right? Well, Israel, their government evicts UNRWA, sending a $7 million bill for operating on land belonging to Israel without consent for the last 7 years. Sort of sounds like what they keep doing to all the Palestinians. That's what they're doing, guys. They're meant to be a jab. They know we know. And that's why it's put forward like this. They know the people that support them to death will do the same, like the U.S. government will pretend this makes sense. It demands UNRWA, quote, stop any illegal use, destroy everything you built in violation of the law. Interesting, like Stripe, they just retroactively change it and go, now you've been guilty for 10 years. Your fault. It's just dishonest. This is criminal activity. Here's Times of Israel. Israel Land Authority orders UNRWA to evacuate Jerusalem premises within 30 days. Here's what it says. They must vacate East Jerusalem premises in 30 days following the approval of a demand from Israel. And it says in a letter to UNRWA, they write that it suddenly owes them 27 million shekels, $7.3 million for operating on land belonging to Israel without consent. You've got to be kidding me. I mean, it's the same game we just told you they play with people in permits in Israel or in Gaza, where they say, you need a permit. They apply for a permit. They say no. And then years down the line, they go, you don't have a permit. We're going to bulldoze your house and charge you for it. Even though they've been displaced to that location from the last time. They put them there. They make something of it and they go, now you don't have a permit. You got to go. It's torture. They know what they're doing, and they're doing it because they want these people to suffer. And they know that in the past, nobody has cared about it. But this is just grotesque. Pretending they now owe you money. Guys, Israel has been, at least in some ways, working with this entity for a long time. They know what this is. This is the final move in the game to get rid of UNRWA. They told you the plan before this was to get rid of UNRWA. They've been secretly removing people's right of return, asking them to denounce their right of return on video. We've covered all of this. The longer this continues, the more they'll be able to manipulate the situation. And the governments blindly supporting Zionism are absolutely allowing it. And Viva Klampa says, and this is my point. So it's clear. Israel arbitrarily passes a law that suddenly says that they are not allowed to be there. That's what happened. And she goes, whoa, it turns out UNRWA's been occupying Jerusalem. How's that for irony? Well, it turns out like it's some documented historical finding. Like, these people are so ridiculous. Israel just made that case. It's basically a big joke. You're doing it to poke them in the eye and go, we can do whatever we want. We'll just retroactively pretend that you've been doing this. They were allowed to be there by the international community, by Israel, by the people involved in this conversation. Jordan included, the U.S. included. Turns out they're occupying. They know what they're doing. And this is what they do while they're starving children to death, while they're burning them alive in their tents. They make jokes, very disgusting jokes that aren't really jokes because they're doing it. Now, on top of everything else, Rami Abdul from Euromed Human Rights Group points out that there have been scenes, and this is after the Rafah massacre, from the side of the displaced persons tents bombing. So another massacre committed by Israeli army at dawn on the 28th. So just one after another. One day after the first massacre. The number of victims has now risen to 7. This is after the other one. And their names are in front of you, many of which are part of the same family. This is their legacy, guys. It never stops. Now, here's a journalist who's on the ground. And this is from the 28th in the morning, still documenting. Well, he posted this then. He's documenting what happened in the Rafah massacre. A total now of charred bodies that they're documenting up to 66. Now, all these games they're playing with somehow the number decreasing. As far as I can tell, the people that are there, it seems to be about there or going up. For the second night, Israel's occupation forces attack and burn tents of displaced people. More and more and more. This isn't one time, guys. They're doing this on purpose. So if we're going to pretend, oops, it was a rocket launcher, and oops, it was ammunition or tents that we accidentally, it was a tragic mistake. Did you tragically make the mistake twice in a row? Is that how that works? He goes on to highlight Apache helicopters. This is Motessem Dalul. Apache helicopters are now firing down on people in Rafah. I guess that's also a tragic mistake. A number of journalists were trying to convey the message from Gaza in these very dangerous conditions. He goes on to highlight as well that on the 29th, this morning, 2 people have been killed and 20 others injured in another Israeli bombing that was right near the World Food Program warehouse. Not a mistake. Uh-oh, is it going to crash on me? Oh, looks like it was about to. Well, Rami Abdul also points out the same thing. An Israeli airstrike actually targets a UN food storage facility east of Rafah City. Coordinated attacks on the food supply, just like everywhere else they've conducted this. He also highlights the Israeli army has imposed a siege on Al Yemen Al Said Hospital, one after another, which shelters thousands of patients and displaced persons in the Jabalia refugee camp. Again, relentless. So ask yourself, if they've done this in Jabalia, what is this, the 9th time they've done these activities? So we're to believe that they cleared the area and then they go back and bomb it again. So either you're that bad at this or you're pretending that, or that you never got them. What's the argument? There is no argument. Nobody who actually is standing in this let's put it this way, who have the ability to stop it. The United States government is the obvious example, are doing anything about it. You can't, if the evidence is in front of you, either they don't care what they're bombing or they're just going back and forth and bombing wherever people are. There's just really no way around it. And they know this and they're allowing it. They're not gaslighting for it. They're cheering it on. Here's an example of a man who got shot from the Jabalia refugee camp. So they sieged the camp, right? So we're supposed to pretend that they go, get out of the way, innocent civilians, because we're going to do it. No, they don't do that. They seize the area, and then anyone that tries to flee, they shoot. This has happened more than once. And this is a sad example of a random Palestinian who tried to get out of the way, and they shot him on the way. This is the chairman of the the Euromed Human Rights Group. Pelham highlights the IDF has used a drone to target the very journalists that were showing you trying to cover the Rafah massacre. The Red Crescent is now blocked from saving these journalists. They don't want the world to witness the war crimes they're committing. This is a film from one of these journalists being bombed. It's happened countless times. Remember, even the admitted amount is hundreds of journalists that they've killed. In the first week, they killed a journalist from Reuters in Lebanon. Now, the last couple of things I want to cover is this story we covered a long time ago. And another example of demonstrating the value of the last American vagabond. So I said, TLAV covered this incident where a Palestinian was branded with the Star of David on his face. Remember that? On August 23rd. Oh, look at that. As Doom pointed out. Had to double check the calendar. Oh, yes, August is before October. His point is, it didn't start in October, guys. These were Palestinians who are being branded. Branded. Where were we? Here we go. By Israeli soldiers for no reason, because he's Palestinian. And the whole story gets even worse when you read the current reality. It was clear then the Israeli government was lying about this. And as Robert wrote here, Israeli forces execute Palestinians in the West Bank, prompting shootings against settlers. Now, this was one of the examples within the whole thing, where they took this person, they beat him up, they branded his face, they let him go, and they blamed him for everything, which happens every single time. Now, here's what they said first, and this is the important thing to think about with the bigger dynamic. The lies about Hamas and what they did at the hospital and everything else, just like every other story, Al Shifa, or any number of the stories where they've been caught lying. On August 19th, before October 7th, the police, not an individual, not a one person, but the entire official state, the police denied that this happened, saying that it was because of a shoe, which is pathetic. Now, the story's changed. 7 Israeli cops are now expected to be tried for stamping the Star of David on his face. Here is the article itself, and these are important points in this. Now, the Justice Ministry Department that investigates these allegations, commonly known as Mahash, announced Tuesday that the officers are expected to be indicted. A 22-year-old resident of the refugee camp in Jerusalem was arrested in August on suspicion of drug possession, by the way, which he did not have. So they arrest him for no reason. That was clearly the excuse. He probably said something they didn't like, or whatever the narrative, or whatever it is. I'm just hypothesizing. My point is that we've seen examples where it's nothing. They gave him a bad look. They called him a name, and so they manufacture stuff to literally kill people or beat them up. There was no body camera footage of the arrest, even though 16 police and border police officers, not even the occupation forces, or rather the IDF, my point is they're all occupation forces, 16 of them took part in the operation. 16. Now, the police claimed they had no choice but to use force because, he was resisting. 16 police officers, and we're told that they had to beat him up because he was resisting. Sounds like the U.S. police who get trained by the IDF too. It says when he was brought to court, he had serious wounds on his face. Now, here's what they keep trying to claim, that it was a shoelace. Right, because look, here's what's funny about this to me in a disgusting way. How is that better? Your argument is, do you realize what kind of pressure it would take to make shoelaces cause that on your face that perfectly? That's really stupid. To make that perfect of a brand, there's no way shoelaces could do that. It would be much different if you're rubbing it back and forth and so on. But even that, let's just pretend that it was. Your argument is that, oh no, it was just my boot on his face, and that's the good answer? For crying out loud, these people are maniacs. The point, though, following the incident, the Department for Investigating Police Misconduct opened an investigation against the officers involved. The findings show the body cameras were not turned on against protocol. Of course. I'm sure they taught that to the U.S. police. The department managed to restore a video where the officers are seen using violence against him in the arrest and suspected the footage was erased on purpose. Yeah, big shock. They lied, guys. They lied. This is the point. 6 officers were then summoned for investigation, some of which were also suspected of obstructing the investigation in a different way. So they clearly knew where this was going, and they deleted evidence. They obstructed the investigation. A few of the officers were suspended from their stations, which usually is the best you're going to get from this. According to a source familiar with the investigation, the footage shows police officers using force. However, it does not supply answers as to how he got the Star of David mark on his face. Well, he tells you. They branded me with the Star of David, guys. It's what he told people. Now, this is just where we are at this point. This is not new. This is November 17th, 2023. Israeli tanks have seared a Star of David into what used to be Katiba Park for families in Gaza. They don't care. In fact, I think they want people to see this. That's how crazy this is. And all you get is people like Brian Mast making excuses for it because they're being paid, manipulated, or compromised, or they don't care. Something. How do you pretend that this is not the most obvious thing in the world? And they compared this right away to things that were happening in Nazi Germany. And this is where just her highlighting the same thing. This is where we are. My point is, not only did they lie about this, they got away with this. And this was long before October 7th. I don't need to convince you guys. The point is, this is only going to get worse if people don't stop it. Now, in the ICC conversation, I want to just quickly highlight this for you. You probably all saw this circulating. Even The Guardian broke this down. So did 972 magazine. Fatou Bensouda closed the ICC's Mavi Marama investigation after the Mossad chief threatened to expose her husband and jeopardize her career. This is a Guardian article. Not about right now either. It's about a previous investigation, and that's her right there. You remember who that is, right? This is the same guy that petitioned Qatar to fund Hamas, and they threatened her and her family and her job, promising future support if she complied. Typical, right? So what you did is you compromised her. You threatened her and forced her to take what you gave her. So now you can, I'll expose you if you don't keep doing what we want. She is now Gambia's ambassador to the UK. Here's what's important. It says, remember, Judge Julia, hold on, I'm jumping ahead. So this is Mohammed Shihada points out a reminder. Israel now revealed dirty intimidation and blackmail campaign against the ICC prosecutor did actually work initially as she closed down the investigation we just referenced and dragged her feet for 5 years on opening investigations in Palestine, then sent the case for 2 years to the pretrial chamber for an opinion on jurisdiction to buy more time. So you realize this is what happened. She's been threatened, been proven. They've covered this. And now she's been shown to be responsible for why they dragged this. It's so obvious. These are gangster tactics. Your government does the same thing, probably to whoever's listening, wherever you are. She opened the official investigation shortly before leaving her position, and only because of immense internal and international pressure. Same goes for the new prosecutor, Khan, who's been procrastinating for 3 years on Palestine until international and internal pressure became too much. Israel's dirty blackmail and intimidation campaign against the ICC is a serious crime under the Rome Statute, Article 70. Keep the pressure. It's working. And here's 972 magazine, surveillance and interference. Israel's covert war on the ICC exposed. And guess what won't happen? I bet you the U.S. won't even address this. Now, this is Judge Julia Sapudin. I'm going to mispronounce that. Sapudin. She was the only person to vote against all 6 ICJ provisional measures to protect Palestine and Gaza. Well, it turns out Mossad spy Yossi Cohen has been threatening her family. Big surprise. Breaking, here's Netanyahu. Following the Rafah massacre, Netanyahu attacks the ICC. Here's what he says. 1,000 good people in The Hague cannot stand against the moral justice of our path. The moral justice after you just burned families alive in their tents. I mean, so they're threatening the judges, threatening their families, just like Pompeo and Bolton. Same thing, guys. There's no difference there. Same thing. They threatened them. Lindsey Graham literally just scuttled over to Israel as fast as he could and bowed to Netanyahu's feet and said, we'll go after them no matter what. I mean, I'm kind of being facetious, but if you look at the videos, it's creepy. He's got this like sheepish, childish grin on his face, like bowing and shaking his hand. I'm not even making that up. That's Lindsey Graham to Netanyahu. And the point is he's clearly jumping over to Israel to say, we're going to go after the ICC for you. These are American representatives. As we're watching them violate the international law, and the whole argument is that the U.S. is different because they follow international law. I mean, this is a comical yet terrifying reality. And you can just watch this about 7 minutes for yourself. But the point is the first and former ICC chief prosecutor, Luis Moreno, speaks on the attacks against the ICC. And this is what's really interesting, seeing how much might have changed over the years. He says in the U.S., they actually impeached President Nixon and impeached President Trump for interfering with justice. Or at least that's how he frames it. Interfering with justice is a crime is similar at the global level. How is it possible the U.S. and Senate and the U.S. government will start to sanction a prosecutor into sanction the persons committing the crimes, as opposed to? Now, again, that's what his framing on the first two about Trump and Nixon. Regardless, the point is it's obvious that what they're doing is attacking the person trying to hold people accountable, not the person committing the crime. Sort of like Julian Assange, right? Exactly like that. Now, lastly, in general, I think this is an important point that I've made many times, but I just want to highlight this startling statement. I don't even know who this person is. 30,000 followers. Oh, look at that. He's that doesn't surprise me at all. Deputy audience editor, whatever that means, for the Table Mag, that ridiculous platform. He says, it's laughable to ask me, a Jew, to take the side of humanity when humanity has abandoned us over and over and over again. What? Like, I mean, historically, it's exactly the opposite. The idea that in every way, humanity has stood up and fought for, I mean, what do you think? So World War II, you guys were ignored? Or did people fight to free you from that problem? Right? I mean, it's crazy. Now, that's not to say that there weren't obvious criminal acts and war crimes and genocide that took place. But to argue that you were abandoned is exactly the opposite of what you tell people about the story. And on top of that, that over and over and over throughout history, people have been bending over backwards to secure that support. Zionism has been the champion of that conversation. Now, that's whether or not you think it should be happening. That's what we're talking about constantly. That's what history books will tell you, whether you agree with it or not. And his argument is suddenly that nobody's on our side. You know what that is? That's Zionists screaming because they're losing control. That's what that is. And acting like, fine, screw everybody because nobody's on our side. Well, there's plenty of Jewish people that are actually right now on the side of stopping this genocide. But he goes, why would I put humanity above myself, my interests, my family, my people, and my survival? So he's literally differentiating himself and all of Jewish society from humanity. I mean, doesn't that seem crazy? I mean, to me, what this is indicative of, again, is not Jewish in any way. It's Zionism losing everything, and it's just like a stomping your feet. It's very childish. Fine, then screw everybody. My ball, I'm going home. You guys all won't even listen to me anymore. That's what we're seeing. That's my opinion, but it's absolutely not the reality what he's highlighting. All he's trying to do is make people, in one last effort, kind of feel like overwhelmed to jump in and stand. Fine, you're right. I have to be on your side. That's what this is. Now, people are going to frame that as racist. It's not. We're not talking about Jewish people. Again, I will show you endless amounts of information, clips, discussions. That it's a huge portion of this pushback is coming from Jewish people. Most of these campus protests were put on by Jewish organizations. The evidence has now come out. They just can't stand that because they want you to think it's about Judaism versus the world. That's his desperate framing. It's not the truth. And as I said, Zionism strives to create strife and division, especially amongst Jews, in order to exploit everyone, but in particular the Jewish population. But the world has awakened to this ploy. Zionism is anti-Semitism. And I'll include this link, I got him right here, to an interview I had with David Icke that discusses specifically Sabbateanism as a foundational part of what people argue Zionism, communism, and Nazism. The title being Zionist Infiltration of Judaism, Weaponized Migration, and Mainstream Alternative Media, the MAMs, which he highlights as Trump and Alex Jones and Tim Pool and Tucker Carlson and all these people, which I completely agree with. Now, also, I want to include this about the larger point, but also just about the campus protests themselves. But the larger point, which was that all of this, not just in this country, but all around the world, what we're seeing continually is people versus empire. Worldwide revolution against tyranny, oppression, and Zionism framed as anti-Semitism. That's what we're watching. Now, lastly, in general, Adam Brandt highlights that today, the Greens will move in Parliament to recognize the state of Palestine. Now, whether you think they mean this or not, this is in Melbourne in Australia, it's powerful. Like Ireland and Spain and Norway, it's changing minds. So they're moving, whether it happens or not, that's a huge thing to see. Here's the Spanish prime minister recognizing East Jerusalem as the capital of Palestine. You know how angry that makes Zionists? This is changing people's minds, directly challenging Israel after its prime minister barred the current Spanish embassy from serving Palestinians, which they did, which was collective punishment. They said, you're not allowed to, and this wasn't just even about the Spanish embassy. They took money that was supposed to go to the Palestinian Authority that was supposed to go to people in Palestine. Not just Gaza, but West Bank too. So they just go screw Palestine. That's what they're doing. They can't stop showing you that it's all Palestine and not just Hamas and Gaza. Well, the Israeli foreign minister describes the recognition of a Palestinian state, you know, the thing they keep pretending they've wanted forever, but until recently, is suddenly complicity in incitement to genocide Jews. That is what desperation looks like. That is the face of desperation. So the thing that you wanted is now incitement to kill Jews? That doesn't make much sense until you just ignore reality, right? It says, what gives, and this is what Adam, I'll just let you read what Adam wrote, but the point is that this guy is now claiming that it is incitement to kill Jews to allow these people to have their own state. That's the best they can do. Now, to finish, Alon Mizrahi points out something I think is important. He says it's in 2020, it is 2024, and you may have to risk your life to be free, or for others to be safe from harm. Now, in my opinion, not an incitement to violence. He's simply trying to highlight, I think, the severity of where we actually are, that we're getting pushed to a point to where it's becoming a fight for your life, especially if you're a Palestinian, but the world is rapidly sliding into a very dangerous position. And that's not for lack of people that want to stop that. It's fact, I think the majority, but the power structures are desperate. This is all my opinion. He goes on to say, risking all for freedom and dignity is nothing new. And anyone would be a fool to think that just because we have internet and mobile phones with cameras and satellites, something profound changed in the mechanisms of power. He's highlighting the same thing. Domination, the change in the mechanisms of power, domination, and the struggle for freedom. But he's saying, with the phones, the satellites, we are reaching people, but they don't change. And I agree completely. He says, but all this is just small, irrelevant details. In essence, nothing changed. And in culture, as in physics, the only thing that stops power is counterpower. The only thing that stops tyranny is strong, unyielding people. And he says power doesn't mean government. And that's true in 2024, just as it was a century, a millennium, or 10,000 years ago. If you're not willing to fight to be free, the dogs and power junkies will immediately know it. Believe me, and you will not be free. In my opinion, that is the epitome of the two-party paradigm, right? If you're willing to sit back and let them know, well, Trump will do it for us, right? Just vote for them and they'll solve our problems. They're desperate for you to take that path. I'm not saying we have to act in violence, exactly the opposite, or that we need to, I mean, the bottom line is that until we as a society act and, recognize at least the problem together. We all have different opinions. That's never going to change. But until we can all recognize that it's not just left, right, that's it, end of story, until we can recognize the government is keeping us where we are, that's and I'm not saying I even have all the answers to that, but we have to first recognize the problem before we can even solve that problem. If you're not willing to fight, you'll guarantee the same cycle. Now I'm going to end with Matt Orfala's amazing clip here called The Laws of War, simply showing you that they just keep screaming that we're following the laws of war, we're following international law, while they explicitly violate all of those things. In fact, don't even care about those things. It's a great clip. Matt's doing good work. So thank you for tuning in today, guys. I appreciate the support as always. We really do need your support more than ever, quite frankly. So as down below, there's plenty of ways to support the platform. If you guys could put it in the chat for me, wherever you are. We have our Buy Me a Coffee, but they may be censoring us tomorrow, it seems. I'm not sure. Our Subscribe Star seems to be a safe bet at the moment. Mailing things in seems to be the best way to go. But as I said before, all the platforms, whether it's Rumble or Rockfin or Locals or Odyssey, there's all options there where you can donate and you can give super chats and everything else. So we need your support. At the very least, watch the content, or as usual, the most important thing to me, even right now while we're dealing with financial, or our entire time doing this, dealing with financial problems, more than anything, I want you to share the content, talk about the content, and think about it. Question what we're doing. Sit down and have conversations with people that disagree with you and talk about this stuff. That's what we need. That's what they're afraid of. But of course, the point is, without continuing to fund this platform, we can't keep doing that. So please help us maintain what we're doing, because I think we're truly changing the conversation. Despite the attacks, I see our reach in specific ways continue to grow. Despite the suppression on the very platforms we're talking about, I continue to see the increased reach. Keep pushing. You're making a difference. I love you all. As always, question everything. Come to your own conclusions. Stay vigilant.
Unarmed Palestinians carrying a white flag coming under fire.
We uphold the laws of war.
They wave white flags, surrounded by Israeli forces. And then suddenly,
we uphold the laws of war.
The IDF ordered his family to evacuate their home and to carry white flags.
We uphold the laws of war, the law of war.
I told you, let's stay home, my son, he says over and over, still clutching his white flag.
Legitimate rules of war. They should be abided by.
2 more people shot, also carrying white flags.
The rules of war.
A Palestinian man raises a white flag.
In line with the laws of war. Human rights and fundamental freedoms. International law.
A Palestinian-American journalist was shot in the head.
The rule of law.
There were no armed Palestinians in the area. There was no warning.
The rule of law.
We are shocked and horrified. AP's building was leveled by an Israeli missile.
The rules of war.
More than half of Gaza's buildings have now been destroyed or damaged.
Mr. President, are Israelis operating within the rules of war that you talked about last week being so important?
Good talking to you. Thank you, sir.
Everybody.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. I gotta get out of here.
All right, well, that was live.
We uphold the rule of law. International humanitarian law that prioritizes protection of citizens. The rule of law, international law. International law. You don't live by the rules of terrorists. You live by the rule of law.
Dear God, what did they all do? This man asks again and again.
Rules of war.
What did they do?
Operate by the laws of war. And there are rules of war. What sets us apart from the terrorists is we believe in the fundamental dignity of every human life. We live by the law of wars.
Let me preface these remarks with I never, ever believe Israeli figures.